Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
Are you ready to elevate your Excel dashboards? You've come to the right place. This Designing Better Excel Spreadsheets and Dashboards training contains 3 segments. We start with cleaning and formatting your data. Then we look at several tips and tricks to help you design your spreadsheets the right way, and then walk you through creating interactive dashboards. We've also made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free so you can just follow along. Just click on the link in the description to get your copy.
All right, so welcome everybody to this month's webinar, Cleaning Data in Excel. For those of you who don't know me or might be new to our webinars, my name is Deborah Ashby and I'm a Microsoft trainer and subject matter expert. And I've been supporting and training all of the Microsoft applications for over 25 years now. And I'm extremely happy to be hosting this webinar for you today. Before we begin, as I said, a little bit of housekeeping. You've got that chat panel open on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you want to post anything, leave some messages, speak to other people, that's absolutely fine. You can tap away in there. Just bear in mind that when I'm sharing my screen, I can't actually see that chat panel. So if you start typing things in for me, questions, things like that, I can't actually see them. And I am alone on this webinar, so I don't have a little helper with me to feed those questions to me. If you do have a burning question about the content, then if you just make a note of it, I always leave some time at the end to go through any questions that you might have. So that's generally how we work these things. Another question that I always get is in relation to if this webinar is being recorded. Yes, it is. You will receive a copy of the recording I think it goes out in the monthly newsletter. So I'm not sure when you get that. It might be towards the end of this month. But yes, you will get a copy of the recording. So if you want to go back with the files that I've just given you and go through it at a slower pace, if you find I go a little bit too fast, then again, please feel free to do that. All right, with all that in mind, let's take a look at today's agenda. Now, we have quite a lot of agenda items, but don't worry too much because these are fairly short things that we're going to go through. So I don't imagine that we're going to run over, but we will see. So we're just going to start out, first of all, by discussing why do we clean data in Excel? Why is it so important? Because for me, this is one of the most important things that often gets overlooked. So we'll go through why we clean data, and we'll take a look at some of the common issues you might find when you're working with data that isn't necessarily your own. So maybe you've downloaded data from a system, or maybe you've been sent a spreadsheet by somebody else and you need to tidy it up. We'll take a look at some of the common issues that might arise, and then we'll go through and we'll look at how we can deal with those. So I'm going to show you things like how to quickly adjust rows and columns, how you can delete out blank rows from your data, and also quickly fill any blank cells. We'll take a look at things like removing duplicates and clearing messy formatting. We'll take a look at how we can format our columns correctly, and also how we can convert numbers stored as text back to numbers. I'm going to show you how you can do things like change the case so that everything is consistent across your spreadsheets. And we'll also take a look at how we can remove any weird spaces, line breaks, and non-printing characters from our data set. I'll show you how to find and replace data. That might be something that you're reasonably familiar with. Checking spelling. Hopefully we're all reasonably familiar with how to do that in Microsoft, but we'll run through it anyway. I'll show you how to format data as a table, and also how some basics of using functions to extract data. I'm going to throw in here, we are going to do a little bit of pivot tables. So if you're interested in that, just after we've cleaned our data, we're going to put it into a nice pivot table. I'm going to show you a couple of little tricks in there as well. And I'm also going to show you a little bit on how you can use Power Query to clean your data, as opposed to doing it all with Excel functions and utilities. So quite a lot of stuff to cover there. As usual, I'm going to throw in as many helpful hints and keyboard shortcuts as I can, just to make sure that we're working through as consistently and as efficiently as possible. So that is the agenda, quite a lot to cover. So the first big topic here, why do we clean data? Why is this so important? Well, ensuring that the data that we use is clean is, as I said, often overlooked, but it is an integral part of being able to analyze a data set accurately. Because as I mentioned, if you create your own data, then, you might be excellent at Excel and everything might look nice and perfect and be ready to analyze. But more often than not, we are getting our data from other sources. So maybe we're downloading it out of a third-party system, maybe something like SAP. Or maybe we are downloading a file from the internet and bringing that into Excel. Or maybe we've just been sent a spreadsheet from a colleague who really doesn't know how to use Excel very well, and it's just a little bit of a mess. All of these scenarios, we need to know how to clean up that data and make it tidy. And that's all we really mean when we say cleaning data. We just want to make sure that it's formatted correctly, it's consistent, and any errors or things that could cause us problems when we analyze it, we want to make sure that those have been removed. Now, if we don't do this, we might find that we get problems further down the line as the resulting analysis ends up messy and inaccurate. So this is really, really important if you want to take your data set and maybe create pivot tables, pivot charts, or even just regular charts, or even if you're just extracting information using things like lookup formulas. If we don't have our data clean, we're going to have problems. So this is why it is so important. So what are some of the issues that we might come across? Well, I've got a few of them listed out here. So you might come across things like inconsistent column widths and row heights. You might find that your data set has blank rows, columns, or cells. And things like blank rows really do cause us problems when we're doing things like pivot tables. We might have duplicate data, so duplicate rows in there. Again, that is going to throw off our analysis. We might have inconsistent case, which can make our analysis look really messy and hard for people to read. The same goes for things like inconsistent spacing. It can start to make our analysis look messy. We might have numbers in our data that instead of being formatted as numbers, they're formatted as text. And this can cause a whole heap of problems, particularly if we're using formulas which rely on those being numbers. They're not going to calculate correctly. So we want to make sure that our numbers are actually numbers. We might have our columns formatted incorrectly. So instead of a date column, we might have it formatted as text or general. And again, it's not going to display correctly. We might find that we have things like messy formatting that's been brought across. This is a really common one, particularly if you're downloading files or copying information from the web into Excel. It will come across with that formatting from the original source. So we might want to do things like remove unwanted formatting or borders or bold, things like that. We might find that when we download our data set that the text isn't split up correctly, or it isn't split up as we need it to be split up. For example, if you have a column that has people's names in it, you may need it to be split up into first name and last name. So we need to know how we can deal with that type of scenario as well. We might have things in our data that need to be replaced. So maybe we need to replace abbreviations with the full word, things like that. We need to make sure that our headers are specified in our data as headers. Again, it's going to make our analysis a lot easier. And we want to remove anything that's completely random. So if we've got any strange characters that have come across or any random line breaks, we need to know how to deal with that as well. Now, these are just some of the issues that you might come across when you're downloading a data set. And these are the main ones that we're going to cover in the session today. So, enough of me talking, let's get into our first example. Now, I'm going to be using the sales data original file. So this is one of the ones that I've dropped into the chat panel. So if you want to open that up, then please feel free. And while I'm here, I just want to switch back and make sure that you can all still hear me, because I'm paranoid after a couple of months ago when nobody could hear me. Can you all still hear me? If you just type that into the chat panel, I can see the chat panel at the moment. So yes, excellent. My paranoia is kicking in big time. I don't know if you were on that session a couple of months ago where I was talking away and nobody could hear a thing I was saying. So all right. Now, this is the example that we're going to be using. Now, the first thing I will say here is this is very contrived. This is just a data set that I've created, and I've just basically tried my best to mess it up so that I can demonstrate some of these things to you. So, as I said, very contrived, but it's going to do the job. Now, just by looking at this data set, you can probably, it looks a mess. You can see many things that are wrong with this data set. So some of the things which are immediately obvious, well, we can see that the rows and the columns are not wide enough and not tall enough. So for some of these, it's kind of cutting off the data. So we need to do something about that. I can see that I have these hash marks. So again, that's because the column isn't wide enough. I can see that we have some strange orange formatting going on. And I can see that some cells have borders and other cells don't. So we need to deal with that. I can see that we have blank rows in here, and I can also see in column B that I have some inconsistencies when it comes to spacing and also case. So those are the things that I can see immediately just by looking at this spreadsheet. Now, there might be other little gremlins lurking around that I can't quite see at the moment, but we will see them as we start to work through. So let's start going about cleaning up this data set. Now, the first thing I'm going to do so that I can see all of my data is we're basically going to auto fit the columns and the rows. Now, the quickest way to do this, and we're going to deal with the columns first of all, is to hover our mouse over column A until we get that black down arrow, click and drag across so that we're selecting all of those columns. And then if we want to auto fit all of the columns so that they are wide enough for the data contained within them, hover your mouse over any of these borders until you get that double-headed arrow and just double click. And that will auto fit all of those columns. That is basically a quick way of going to the home ribbon, going into format and going to auto fit column width. That option will do exactly the same. It's just a lot quicker to double click. Now we can do the same thing when it comes to the rows. If you take a look here, we've got some rows in here. So I could do auto fit row height as well. Again, I could double click on the row boundary in order to change that as well. Okay, so now we've adjusted the column widths and the row heights. Really nice and simple. So now I can see my data a little bit better. What is the next thing that I'm going to deal with here? Well, I can see that I have some blank rows in my data set. So where we have row 8, that's blank, row 13 is blank, row 19, row 29. Now I could go through, if I just had 1 or 2 blank rows in my data, I could simply select the row, right click and go to delete. But if I've got a data set that's very large, maybe I've got 20,000 rows and I've got blank rows throughout, I really don't want to be going through doing these individually. That is going to be too long. It's going to take me too much time. So we can do this quickly by utilizing Go to Special. Now, once again, I'm going to select all of the columns. So I'm going to hover my mouse over column A until we get that little black drop down arrow and drag across. Now, a quick way of jumping to Go to Special is to use the keyboard shortcut Control G. That's going to take you to Go to, and then we can simply click Special. Now, what we can do in here is that we can tell Excel what we want to select in our data. So we want to select all of the blanks that are contained within our selection. So when I do this and click on OK, can you see now it's selecting all of those blank rows, which means I can delete them all in one go. So I'm going to go up to the home ribbon, into delete, and then delete sheet rows. And that is going to get rid of them all in one go. So much quicker than going through and doing them all individually. Now, it's worth noting along the same vein here, if we have some cells, and I'm just going to delete out some numbers randomly in here. If we have blank cells in our data, so maybe we have blank cells like this, it's always better to have a value in here than just leave the cell blank if we're doing some kind of analysis. So even if you just put a 0 in here, that is better than nothing. So how do we automatically input a 0 into all of the blank cells? Well, again, we can select. You can select the entire data set if you wanted to, Control A, or if it's just in specific columns, you can just select those columns. And again, we're going to use Go to Special. So Control G again, Special, and we're going to choose blanks. This time it's just going to highlight those blank cells. And if I want to put a 0 in all of those in one go, I just press 0 and Control Enter, and it's going to fill them all in. Okay, so go to Special, type in 0, Control Enter. Now I don't want zeros in those cells, so I'm just going to undo Control Z a couple of times to put my data back. Okay, that is a way to deal with blank cells. It's always better to have 0 as opposed to nothing in there. What else do we need to deal with here? Let's deal with the formatting, because we've got these grey shaded backgrounds on some cells. We've got orange, and I can also see that I've got some weird sort of borders up here as well. So I want to make everything more consistent and just remove all of this formatting. So I'm going to select all of my data. So I can click anywhere in my data, little keyboard shortcut to select all of your data, Control A to select everything. Now that Control A keyboard shortcut is worth noting if you're clicked outside of your data set. So if I'm just clicked randomly on a cell here and I press Control A, that's going to select the entire spreadsheet. If you just want to select your data, make sure you're clicked within your data when you press Control A. Now, this is a really simple one. We can go to the Home tab. In the editing group, we have a clear option just here. And we have a few things that we can clear, but I just want to clear the formatting. So I'm just going to choose clear formats, and that's going to remove those weird borders and the background shading that I have there. Nice and straightforward. What else do I want to do on here? Well, something which is actually quite hard to see just by looking at your data is if you have any duplicates in your data set. And when I say duplicate, I mean an exact duplicate. So where everything, every single column is duplicated. So it's a true duplicate. How can we remove those, or how can we check for those? Well, in Excel, we do have a Remove Duplicates button, which you will find on the Data ribbon. And Remove Duplicates is over in the Data Tools group, and I think it's this one just here. Yes. Now, the thing with this button is when you click it, you can tell Excel that your data has headers, which we do. And then we can choose which columns we're looking for duplicates in. So if I want to only remove exact duplicate records where we have exactly the same thing in every single cell duplicated, I want to make sure that I have all of the columns selected just here. So I'm only looking for exact duplicate records. Let's click on OK, and you can see it's found 5 duplicate values and it's removed them. Click on OK again, and they're gone. Okay, so a really nice quick way to remove exact duplicates from your data set. What else do we have in here? Well, let's take a look here at column F, because we've got a couple of little things going on here. Now, notice that manufacturing price, we have values in here. So this is basically $3 this is supposed to be. But take a look at these two just here. We have little green triangles next to them. Now, this is because the number in this cell, for whatever reason, Excel thinks this is text as opposed to a number. And we can tell that because text is always aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, whereas numbers are always aligned to the right. So for the rest of these are aligned to the right, so those are correct. But for these two here, they are aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, so it thinks it's text. Now, I want to make sure that these are converted back to numbers. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. If I've just got 1 or 2, the easiest way to do this is simply to click on the little triangle and just say convert to number. And that's literally going to take it from a number back to text. Now, let me just undo that, Control Z. Because what if I have quite a few of these through a very large data set? Maybe I've got over 100 of them. I don't want to have to go through each one, selecting the triangle and converting them to text. So there is a little trick that we can use to do these all in one go. And this does seem a little bit strange, but let me show you how this works. What I'm going to do is somewhere over in a blank cell, I'm going to type in the number 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy this number 1, Control C. I'm going to go to the column that I want to apply it to. So let's select all of that data, Control Shift down arrow to select everything. And then we're going to go to paste. We're going to go into paste special, and we're going to say multiply. Click on OK, and that will convert everything to a number. So that is a much quicker way of doing things if you have lots of numbers in a column that are for some reason stored as text. That's a quick way of converting them back to numbers. Okay, so really nice and straightforward. What else do we want to do here? Well, let's talk about number formatting. Let's deal with that. Now, making sure that the text or the columns are formatted correctly with the correct number formatting is really important. Now, for the most part, if we take a look at the home ribbon in this number group, most things are formatted as general. And general is kind of your middle of the road formatting. You can really apply general to most things, particularly text columns. There are some columns, though, that you want to make sure that you have the correct formatting, such as if you have currency or numbers or dates, you want to make sure we apply the correct formatting for those. So let's take a look through here. Units sold, that's a number. So I want to make sure that we have this set to number. And again, we can adjust those decimal places. I'm going to take those down to 0. Now, all of the next few, these ones are basically currencies. So manufacturing price, sales price, gross sales, sales, COGS, and profit. So I'm going to select all of these columns and I'm going to press Control 1 to bring up my Format Cells dialog box. Now I'm going to change these to accounting format. Now, people always ask me, what is the difference between currency format and accounting format? I tend to use accounting format because with accounting format, what you'll find is that when you have numbers in a cell, accounting format makes sure that the decimal place is always lined up and that the currency symbol is kind of shoved across to the left-hand side to keep it out of the way of the numbers. If we use currency format, the currency symbol is right next to your number and the decimal places aren't necessarily lined up. So when it comes to reading down numbers, I prefer accounting format. I find it a lot easier to read. So I'm going to apply that. I'm going to take my decimal places down to 0 and click on OK to apply that formatting. And actually, I think for manufacturing price, I'm going to take those up. I think that looks a little bit better. Let's move across to the date column. Now, again, in this date column, I've got some strange numbers, and this is a very common thing to find when you're working in Excel. You'll have a date column and you'll look in that date column and these look nothing like dates, and you're left wondering what on earth these exactly are. Well, if you want to know what these numbers actually are, this is basically the number of days past the 1st of the 1st, 1900. So according to Excel, the beginning of time was the 1st of the 1st, 1900, and this is just the number of days past that date. So effectively, dates are simply numbers, but we don't display them as dates until we apply date formatting. So if you take a look at column L, currently this is set to general formatting. So it's just displaying the number underneath. So all we need to do here is change this to short date format, and then we get our correct dates. So we are looking pretty good so far. What else do we need to do in here? Well, let's take a look at column B over here. I can see we have a few issues going on. Now, in column B, where we have the country names, we have a few different issues. So we have some inconsistent case. So you can see that some of these are in capital letters and some of them are in lower case. Not lowercase, sorry, proper case, where the first letter is capitalized. And I want everything to look like that. So I need to convert the uppercase words into proper case. Also notice that I have some weird indentation going on here. So if you look just before Canada in row 2, we've got a large gap just there. The same thing down here, we have some weird large gaps. So I want to make sure that I remove any weird spacing issues from here as well. Now we can use Excel text functions to do both of these things in one go. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Now, when I'm going through and cleaning up or tidying up a specific column, I like to add in a helper column. So a quick way of adding a brand new empty column is to just select where you want to add and then Control-Shift+. That is going to give you a new column. So now what we can do here is the first thing I want to do is I want to change the case. Now, if you want to use functions to do this, there are 3 functions you can use depending on how you want to change your case. So we have upper, we have lower, and we have proper. So if I wanted to change everything to uppercase, I could use upper. The only argument is the text we want to change. Close the bracket, hit enter, it's going to be uppercase. If I want to change everything to lowercase, I use lower. Nice and straightforward. But in this case, I want to change everything to proper case. Enter, and there we go. If I double click the fill handle, you can see now that all of those words which were in uppercase are now in proper case. So that is looking pretty good. Now take a look at a couple of things in here. It hasn't done anything for the spacing that we have at the beginning just here. So we want to combine it with another Excel function called trim. And what trim does is it will remove any erroneous spaces at the beginning of words or at the end of words, because sometimes if we double click, you can see here the cursor is right up against Canada, so I can see that we don't have any spaces after Canada. But you might find that a few spaces sometimes have got in there and your cursor will appear over here, which means there is space in here. And again, that can cause you problems when you're doing your analysis, but it's really hard to see spaces at the end. So I always like to run things like this using the trim function to remove any of that weird spacing. And the good thing is we don't need to add another helper column. We can simply combine trim with our proper command. So let's go up to the formula bar, and I'm just going to add trim on the front here. Our text is generated by the proper command, and we just need to make sure that we close off trim at the end. Control Enter will keep us in the same cell, and then I can double click to copy that down. So we've managed to do both things in one go. Now there is another function that you can add in here which will deal with things like line breaks. Now we don't have any of those in here, but if you have a forced line break, and that generally occurs, and if I just show you very quickly, when people press Alt-Enter in between 2 words and it looks something like that, if we have line breaks, we can effectively remove those using another command called clean. And clean will also remove any non-printing characters that it finds in a cell. So you can always add on to the front of this clean as well, add another closing bracket on the end, and you're basically running 3 different functions on one piece of data. It's going to clean up everything. We can double click to copy it down, and we just have one nice tidy formula. So really simple to clean that up. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that where we have USA, because we've converted everything into proper case, it's also converted USA down here. Now, we are going to deal with that in a moment because we're actually going to change what this says. So don't worry about that too much at the moment. Everything else is pretty much correct, which means we can simply add in the title up here, like so. And one little trick here. Because we don't want 2 columns with the same thing, we only want to keep our clean column. Look what happens if I try and delete out this column just here. I'm going to get a whole bunch of reference errors. Now we get those because the formulas that we're using in that cell, so these formulas just here, reference column B. So if we delete column B, that is why we're getting those reference errors. So what we need to do, and this is a little trick that I use all the time, is we need to basically use paste special and just paste the values, because that is going to remove all of the underlying formulas. So what we can do here is we can select column C, Control C to copy, and then we're going to go to paste, and we're going to say paste the values only. So what that does is it just leaves the text that we can see, but it removes the formulas underneath. So now you can see when I click in the formula bar, that trim and proper formula has disappeared, which means we can now delete out that column safely and nothing's going to happen to our text. All right, so really useful little functions. Hopefully everybody is still with me and awake. What else do I want to do to this data? Well, let's take a look. Let's deal with this USA in here. I'm going to do a find and replace. So we're going to select column B and let's press Control H to bring up replace. So this is where we can just simply say what we want to find and then what we want to replace it with. So I want it to find USA and I want it to replace it with the capitalized version of USA. I can click replace all. It's made 140 replacements. Click on OK, and we can close that down. So a really nice and simple, quick way to do that. What else do we want to do in here? Of course, we would always want to run a spell check on our data. And again, this is very straightforward. You can go up to the review ribbon, and we have the spelling just here. Yes, I want to continue checking. It's telling me that all of my spelling is correct, which is great. So you do want to make sure that you do run a spell check, because again, if you have one little thing spelt wrong and you're trying to do an analysis, for example, I've got government up here in cells A2 and A3. If I have one of these spelt slightly wrong, if I'm doing an analysis, it's going to think that those are two entirely separate words as opposed to the same thing. So if I'm doing anything which requires an aggregation, sums, things like that, then that's going to cause us problems. So really important to spell check your data set as well. So I think this data set is looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do here, the final step, I always put my data into a table before I even attempt to analyze it. So a quick way of doing that is to press Control T. It's going to pick up where my table is located. You can see those marching ants around the outside. Very important to specify, my table has headers. Click on OK. And now I have my data in an Excel table. Now notice what happens as soon as I do this, I now get a new ribbon called Table Design. And we can see that at the top here. And this is where I have all different kinds of tools for my table. So if I want to change the color of my table, maybe I don't like this style particularly, I can change it from there. I can add a total row, things like that. Another thing that we can do here is we can give our table a name. So when we create a table in Excel, in this properties group, you can see it's called Table 1 by default. And every time you create a table, Excel is going to give it that really generic name, Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, so on and so forth. Now, it's always advantageous to give your table a more meaningful name. So I'm going to call my table sales underscore data. And again, when you're naming your tables, you can't have any spaces in those names. So if you've got two words like I do here, you need to separate them with an underscore or just have no space in the middle there. Now, why are tables so important? Well, tables auto expand. So if you create some kind of chart or pivot table, and then you want to add more data into the bottom of this table next month, it means that the table will expand to accommodate the new data. And it means that any charts that are built off of this data can be updated simply by clicking one button. Now, I don't want to go too far off down that route because we really just want to focus on cleaning data in this session, but that is why tables are so important. Now, we are going to do, I'm going to show you a very quick pivot table just to show you how this works once we've cleaned up our data. So I've got my nice looking clean data set. I'm going to put it into a pivot table first of all. So from the table design ribbon that I'm currently clicked on, in the tools group, I'm going to choose summarize with pivot table. So it's picked up my table range. Remember, it's called sales data. And I'm going to put this on a new worksheet. So let's click on OK. And here is my blank pivot table report. If you're not used to working with pivot tables, what it basically does is it imports all of the column headings of our data and puts them into this pivot table fields area. And we can see all of the column headings listed just here. We can then drag and drop these column headings into any of these areas to build a pivot table. And the cool thing about pivot tables is that they are completely dynamic. So if we don't like one analysis, we can simply change it by moving the fields around. So I could do a very quick analysis here. Let's do something like, let's go for country. Let's drag that into rows. And maybe I want to see the gross sales by country. So I'm going to drag gross sales into there. And now I have my pivot table. If I hadn't cleaned my data, I could have some very weird things going on in there. I could have blanks. The data might not be adding up correctly. It wouldn't look as tidy as it looked if I hadn't cleaned my data first. And it could be very confusing for anybody who's looking at this pivot table report. So really important to clean your data. Now, what else can we do here with this pivot table? Well, let's put it into a quick pivot chart so I can show you some of the differences. So we are going to do a little bit of formatting here. I'm going to right click and we're going to go to value field settings because I want to tidy up these numbers just here. So if we go into number format, I'm going to apply a counting format to these numbers in the pivot table. I'm going to take the decimal places down. Let's click on OK and click on OK again to get those into a nicer format. So because I have a small data set here, I'm going to create a very quick pivot chart. But I don't want to include the grand total in my pivot chart, so I'm going to turn that off first of all. So let's go up to the Design tab, to Grand Totals. And I'm going to say, let's turn off grand totals for rows and columns. And now I can create a little pivot chart. And we'll just do a very basic column chart like so. And we can add that into our worksheet. So this is all coming from our cleaned up data set. If we hadn't done any of that cleaning, this is not going to look as nice as it does. Now we could make this look a lot nicer. We could spend a lot more time formatting this. I am going to show you a couple of little tricks here, which I think are worthwhile. Once we get our pivot chart into here, in general, I tend to hide these gray filter buttons. So I'm going to right click and say hide all field buttons on charts. I like to keep my charts looking as clean as possible. So in general, I remove everything that I don't need. So this legend here, which is showing the total, isn't really doing a great deal. So let's just delete that out. What else can I do here? I'm going to display the actual values. So the gross sales, I'm going to display them above each of the bars instead of at the side here. So what we can do is right click, add data labels, and it's going to add those values, and I can then delete this axes just here. Again, we're trying to get this to look as clean as possible. Now, I still don't particularly like the way that this looks. I'm going to widen out these bars very slightly. If we right click and go to Format Data Series, I'm going to take the gap width down a little bit to make these bars wider. And what I could do is I could change the formatting on these numbers so that they say million as opposed to the full number just here. So this is a little bit of custom formatting to make everything look a little bit neater. And again, this is cleaning up a pivot chart that we've created. So it still sort of falls under that whole bracket of cleaning up our data and making things look as presentable as possible. So if we want to make any changes to the way that these numbers are formatted, if we go back to our pivot table, right click and go into value field settings and into number format, we can apply some custom number formatting of our own. So when we choose custom, we can type into here, and if we type pound sign, comma, comma, and then type in an M, it's going to format it as 27M as opposed to 27, 000, 000. So it's a much neater notation when you're trying to present data in your charts. So we can put a pound sign, 2 commas, and then M to represent millions. Let's click on OK and OK again. And you can see immediately this looks a lot neater. So that is just a little trick that you could possibly do if you want to make your charts look nice and clean. A little bit of custom formatting in there. Another thing we might want to do here is right click and we can format our data labels, and I'm going to choose to display these on the inside end of the bar, and I'm going to make them white and maybe bold, and then I can simply add my chart title. So this is let's say gross sales by country. And of course, we could do a lot more formatting here to make this look really nice and smart. But hopefully that gives you a few ideas, and hopefully you've seen there how important it is to clean up your data set, make it manageable, and how we can analyze it using a pivot table and a pivot chart very quickly. Okay. Let's take a look at another quick example where we're going to see how flash fill works, because flash fill is going to be your little genius button. If you don't know what flash fill is, then you are in for a treat. You're going to absolutely love this. So let's close this down. I'm not going to save, because what we're going to do this time is we're going to import another file, and that is this one just here, the text file that I sent through to you in the chat. Just bear with me a second. I need a sip of drink. There we go, nice cup of tea. So the second file I sent you was this text file just here. Now, if we open up this text file and just take a quick look at it, this is something, again, that you might get downloaded out of some kind of third-party system. And this is where we kind of have data, but it's not in a really great readable format. So I can see here that we have some column headings. We've got employee name, hire date, salary, department, job title. And these are separated by what we call a delimiter. And in this case, the delimiter is a semicolon. So a semicolon basically separates all of the fields throughout this data. So we're going to use that semicolon as our starting point to break up this data and bring it into Excel. So this is the data that we're going to use. Let's close down this file, because what we can do is we can directly import text files into Excel and then we can clean them up. So if we go up to File, all we need to do is go to Open, and then we just need to find our text file. So for me, if I go to the desktop, because this is where I have it stored. Now remember, if you're going from within Excel, Excel only shows by default files with a .xlsx extension. So what you might find you have to do is click on All Files to be able to see that text file just there. So I'm going to select the text file. Let's click on Open, and immediately Excel recognizes that this isn't an Excel file. It is a text file. So we need to tell Excel what to do with it. So you can see here, the text import wizard has opened. So the first thing it's asking us is the type of file that best describes this text file. And the top option is delimited. So it's saying, do we have characters such as commas or tabs separating each field? And we can see just below, we have a preview of our data. Now, if you remember, I said that we have delimiters, and the delimiter is the semicolon. That's what separates each of these fields. So we're going to keep it on delimited and click on My Data Has Headers, almost forgot that, and then click on Next. So now we need to tell Excel what delimiter is in use in our data set. So for us, that is a semicolon. Now I can choose that from here because we have it in our list. Now, as soon as I select semicolon, you can see that Excel knows where each of these columns breaks, because wherever we have a semicolon, that's where we have a new column. So this is looking pretty good. Let's click on Next. And I don't need to do anything here. I can click on Finish. And that is going to load that text file into Excel. And you can see it's broken it up into the correct columns. Now again, this is where data cleaning comes in. I can see straight away that I need to widen out these columns. So I'm going to select everything, double click to auto fit the contents. Now, what about, I can see in here, employee name, column A, I have people's names all in uppercase. Now, I actually don't want these names to display like that. I don't want it to say Juarez Jose. I want it to say Jose Juarez. And I also want it to be in proper case. So what I could do here is I'm going to insert another column, Control, Shift, plus. Now I could use text functions to do this, but that's going to take a lot of time. So instead, I'm going to do everything all in one go using Flash Fill. Now, when we're using Flash Fill, all we need to do here is tell Excel how we want the text to look. So I want it to look like this, Jose Juarez. So I'm switching those names around and I'm also making them lowercase. Control Enter leaves us in the same cell. Control E invokes Flash Fill and it copies that format down. Take a look at that. Such a magical little tool. Now notice here it's also switched around the title, so we might just have to drag this across or retype it in. That's not too much of a problem. And then we can quickly delete out that first column. So much quicker. Now, there are two other ways that you can invoke Flash Fill. So let's take a look at both of those. I'm going to insert another column just here, Control Shift plus. And I want to make all of these lowercase. So again, I can use Flash Fill. I just need to tell it what the first one needs to look like. And then if I press Enter, as soon as I start to type the second one, can you see it ghosts down? So Flash Fill is recognizing the pattern that I want to apply. And now all I need to do is press Enter to accept that. So again, Flash Fill is amazing. And that's just two different ways that you can invoke it. Let's take a look at the final way. We're going to do the same thing, but this time with the job title, we're going to change these to lowercase, but we're going to use Flash Fill again. So we want intern in here, Control Enter, and we can go up to the data ribbon and we have the Flash Fill button just here. When we click it, it's going to copy that down. How simple is that? So it makes cleaning up your data a lot quicker and a lot easier. Flash Fill is the magic little button. Once again, we can then go through tidying up what we need to tidy up. So I'm going to probably apply some currency formatting or counting formatting to this particular column. I've got date formatting on here. We are pretty much good to go. The final thing to do is just Control T to put this into a table. And this is ready for analysis. So lots of little techniques that are going to come in really useful the next time that you analyze your data. Now we have about 10 minutes left. I am going to quickly run through with you some techniques in Power Query as well, because aside from knowing all of these little formulas and tips and tricks to clean up your data within Excel, we also now have Power Query, which we can use to do the same thing, but it's a more graphical interface. So if you're not somebody who particularly enjoys formulas or you find it difficult to remember things like trim and proper and stuff like that, you might find that Power Query is a little bit easier for you to use. Power Query is also amazing if you want to do things like combine files together. So that is exactly what we're going to do now. So let's close this down. Now, I haven't sent you these files that I'm going to use. So, and the reason why is because we have to have this set up in a very specific way. So what I will do is I will make sure that these files get attached to the email that you receive with the recording of this webinar so that you can download them. We have quite a few files across different folders and it doesn't quite work if you don't have them in the exact folders. So I will make sure that those get attached when you get the email with this recording. So let's use Power Query to combine some files and clean up that data. So let's take a look at the data first of all. Now I've got a folder here and it's called sales data. If I open up this folder, I have two files in here, sales data for 2017 and sales data for 2018. Now if I open up one of these files, you can see what we have in here. So we've got a date column, we've got an order ID column, we have a customer number column, we have a trip column. So this is basically, this whole data set are basically trip sales for particular years, in this case 2017. So I can see the trip in here, I can see the salesperson, the trip price, and also the year. And the other file that I have in this folder is just the same file, it's just data for 2018. So maybe this is data for some kind of travel agency. And every year, a file for that year's sales gets dropped into this sales data folder. So what we want to make sure that we do is that when a new file gets added to this folder, all of the data and all of the analysis that we've done automatically updates. So we can do this by combining the files together and then making sure that we're linking to this particular folder. So that's quite complicated and quite a lot to get your head around. So let's take a look at it slowly. Now I'm going to close down this file. And I'm going to say we don't want to save that. And we're just going to start with a blank workbook. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump up to the data tab. And in the get and transform group, we're going to go to get data from file. And I'm going to say I want to get data from a folder because I want to include both of those files. The sales files for 2017 and 2018 are both in the sales data folder. So effectively what I'm doing here is I'm connecting to that particular folder. So let's say from folder. And now I need to select the folder. So I have mine stored on my desktop. And it's this one here, the sales data folder that contains those two sales data files. I'm just going to select the folder. Let's click on open. And we're now creating a connection between Excel and that folder. Now you can see here, it's had a look in the folder and it can see sales file 2017 and sales file 2018. Those are the two files within that folder. So everything is looking good so far. Now at this stage, if we take a look at the bottom, we have a few different things we can do. We can choose to combine these files together. So if your files are exactly the same, and what I mean by that is they have the same structure, the same column headings, instead of having two separate files, you can simply have them all in one file that contains all of the data for 2017 and 2018. So you can do that, which is exactly what we're going to do. But if you want to clean up your data or at least check your data to see if it needs to be cleaned up, we have a transform data button at the bottom. So let's click on transform data. Now this opens up Power Query. And if you've never been into Power Query before, this can look a little bit intimidating. But basically what we do in Power Query is exactly what we've just done with our Excel files. This is where we can come to clean up our data. And everything that we did manually in Excel, we can find in this Power Query editor. So we can do things like remove blank rows. We can split columns by delimiter. We can do a find and replace. We can change the formatting of each of the columns. There's lots of things that we can do. So this is just a more graphical way of doing those things. Now, the first thing I want to do here is I want to take these two files, 2017 and 2018, and I want to combine them together. So I just have one big long file. Now, a quick way of doing that from here is to click these two downward arrows, which will combine both of these files into one file. And again, this can take a few seconds, but it's going to show you a preview of what this is going to look like. That looks pretty good to me. Let's click on OK. So it's going to open up the contents of both of those files and basically combine them together in one big long file. And we can check that because if we check the source name column at the top, you can see it includes data for 2017 and 2018. So that is perfect. So now I have this here, I can go through, I can look at my data in my columns, and I can see if I need to clean anything up in Power Query. Now I'm going to put this data into a pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to decide if I need all of these columns. So do I need the source name column? Well, no. This is a column which has basically been added in by Power Query, which just tells me what the file name is. And I'm not really going to need that in any analysis that I do of this data. So let's get rid of it. We can right click and we can choose remove. Nice and straightforward. We can then go through and check to make sure that the data type we've selected for each of these columns is correct. So I have dates in this first column, and if I click the little calendar, this is where we can change or choose what type of data we have in this particular column. And I will say that most of the time, Power Query tends to get this correct. So this is a date and it's selected the correct format. Order ID, well, what have we got there? Well, this has chosen a whole number. Yep, that's fine. Customer, this is text. Yes, because it starts with text, so it's going to think that it's text. Trip is text, salesperson, so on and so forth. So these number formats are worth checking and changing if they are incorrect. Now, a couple of things that we can do to tidy up this data a bit better. If we take a look at this trip column, we can see here that we have a trip code, then we have a dash, and then we have the actual trip name. So if I'm thinking about analyzing this data using a pivot table, I might want to do a summary of the trip prices by the trip code. Now, currently I couldn't do that because I have the trip code and the trip name combined into one column. So what I'd probably do here is separate the trip code, have that in its own separate column, and then have the trip name in a separate column. So I basically want to split up this column. Now, again, we could do this in Excel by using something like Flash Fill, or we could use text to columns or something like that. In Power Query, this is so simple. We just simply select the column that we want to split up, and then on the Transform tab, in split column, we can say by delimiter, and then we can just choose where we want to split it. So where we have the dash is where I want to split. So we have a few different options in here. If you can't see what you want, you can go to custom, and it's remembered it from when I last typed it in. We have a dash in there, click on OK, and it's going to split those into two columns. We can then rename these column headings. So double click, and I can call this trip code, and this one name. And because I've split this column at the dash, there was a space either side of that dash. So I'm pretty sure that the trip name is now going to have an erroneous space at the beginning. But not to worry, because we can apply that trim function to this column. Remember, we used that before in Excel. I can select the column and we go to Format, and we have trim in here. Also notice we have the clean function in here. If we wanted to change to uppercase, lowercase, or capitalize, remember, again, we did that using Excel functions. In Power Query, we can simply select. So I'm going to choose the trim function, and I'm going to apply a trim to both of these columns that I just tidied up to remove any erroneous spaces. So those are a couple of things that you can do in Power Query to clean your data. Pretty much everything that we do in Excel, we can do in here. And then once we're happy with how our data looks, we can go to the Home tab, close and load, and I can load it directly into a pivot table. So let's go to close and load, and I'm going to say create me a pivot table report, click on OK. And it's going to bring all of that data in, and I can just choose my fields to analyze by. So maybe I want the trip name in, no, let's put that in the rows, the trip price down here. And there is my pivot table made up of 2017 and 2018 data. I have both in there. If I want to apply a filter by year, I can drag the year column up to filters, and then I can choose, if I'm just interested in 2017, I can choose that way. Once again, I can start to apply things like number formatting. I won't, because I'm trying to save a little bit of time because we're about out of time. The final thing I want to show you is what happens when we want to add 2019's data to this pivot table. Now, because of the way that we've set this up, we created a connection between Excel and the folder. So what happens is when we add a new file to this folder, it's going to automatically refresh all of the pivot tables. So let's take a look at that. Maybe it's the end of the year and I have a little file just here, and we have this file just here with our 2019 sales data. Now I'm going to copy this, Control C, and we're going to add it to the sales data folder. So there we go. There's the new data for the new year. I want this to be included in my analysis. So because we already have that connection there, I simply need to go back to the pivot table. And if you take a look at the grand total at the bottom here, all we need to do is click refresh and refresh all. And did that update? Yeah, it brought it across. I didn't see that total change unless it might have automatically refreshed and I didn't see it before. So anyway, when you click refresh, it will bring across that data. And you can see here, it has brought it across because we have 2019 listed in here. All right, so any tables or pivot charts that you have attached will automatically update just by clicking that refresh button. Okay, so that is an advantage of pulling your data into Power Query, cleaning it up in there, combining it and creating that connection with a folder. Oh, I feel out of breath now. So that is pretty much all I wanted to go through with you today. We've seen a lot of different techniques. We've taken a look at a basic example where if you prefer to work purely in Excel and be able to clean your data up by using Excel functions and utilities, we've seen the main things that we can do there to clean up our data and then analyze it. But we've also seen how we can import data from a text file, clean that up using utilities like Flash Fill, a super great utility for cleaning up data fast. And then we've also seen how we can use Power Query not only to clean up our data, but also how we can use it to create connections and import data as well. So all of this is perfect if you do a lot of data analysis. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on designing better spreadsheets in Excel. Now, I know the title of this webinar, Designing Better Spreadsheets, it doesn't really tell you much. It's quite a broad catch-all kind of a title. But we are going to go into a lot of different things today. Some things you may know, some things you're probably not going to be as familiar with. But the general kind of idea is to make it so that your spreadsheets are really usable for anybody that you send them to, and also so that we can cut down the amount of errors that are being produced in our spreadsheets. So I'm just going to start out by talking to you a little bit about why it's important to design your spreadsheets. I'm then just going to go through some tips that I have, some golden rules when it comes to designing or setting up spreadsheets. We're going to talk about the layout and the structure of your workbooks, and I'm going to show you how you can utilize something called summary sheets. I'm also going to do a recap on absolute referencing because that's a really important thing when it comes to cutting down on errors and the amount of things you're having to change in a spreadsheet. And we're also going to look at how we can use cell styles and formatting to make our spreadsheets really easy to understand. I'm then going to show you how you can do things like add controls into your spreadsheet using things like data validation. I'm going to show you how you can protect your worksheets and possibly protect just certain parts of worksheets, again, to control the information that's going into your spreadsheet. And then finally, I'm going to speak to you about version control. Now, quite a lot that we're covering in there, and we're going to go through all of this at a reasonable pace. Now, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make that recording available to you after the fact. And I do have the lovely Mr. Adam Lacey on the call with me today. I don't know if he wants to say hello or if he's gone on to mute, but we have Adam with us today.
Hello, everybody. Just came off mute. Yeah, how you doing? If you're having any issues seeing or anything like that, just log on and log log off and log back on again. I noticed there's one person with a problem, I think, but I'll chat to them in the chat panel. Any questions? Just drop them into there, and I will try and answer them. And if not, we'll save them for the end for Debs.
Wonderful, thank you, Adam. All right, so let's start out by just discussing this first point. So why it's important to design your spreadsheets. Now, I think when we're using Excel, there tends to be this tendency, and it's the tendency you find in everybody, to just open a new blank worksheet and kind of dive in and start inputting your data into cells, or maybe importing your data from an external source without too much thought as to the design and the usability of the workbook that you're creating. Because in our minds, as long as the data is there and we understand it, then that's all that matters, right? Well, not really. These days, we rarely create workbooks that are solely used by ourselves. More often than not, we share workbooks with other people, with colleagues, with external clients, and we might have multiple people in a spreadsheet updating data. So it's really, really important that you think about this when you're putting together a spreadsheet. And the reason why, I'm sure we have all had this experience where we've spent quite a bit of time putting together a spreadsheet. We might have calculations in that spreadsheet, and it might be quite complex. And when we've finished it, we're really proud of the work that we've done and how everything calculates correctly. We've then sent that spreadsheet to someone else, and within 10 minutes, they've managed to mess up all of the work that you've done. Now, that might be either through that person's lack of Excel knowledge. They might not really understand what they're doing. It might be that they are confused about which parts of the spreadsheet they're supposed to be editing and which parts they're supposed to be leaving alone. Or it could just be a genuine accident. Again, it's pretty easy to be in a cell, hit the wrong button, and before you know it, you've broken a formula and a calculation is no longer working, and you then have to spend time trying to figure out what's gone wrong with that spreadsheet. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to really cut down on the amount of errors going into your spreadsheet and just make it super simple for everybody to understand what they're supposed to be doing when they open your spreadsheet. So a big part of designing better spreadsheets is to make sure that everything is organized, it's easy to understand for everyone, it has clear instructions, and it cuts down on errors by limiting the cells that others can change. Okay, so that's why it's important to design your spreadsheets and think about it when you're doing it. So what we're going to look at first, I'm just going to go through some tips for designing spreadsheets. Now, I'm going to go through each of these points. Now, in a moment, we're going to demo all of these points in Excel, so you can see exactly what I mean from each of these points. So the first thing I would say is organize your data. So have your input, your calculations, and your output all on separate tabs. So what do I mean by that? Well, your input might be your raw data, the data that you're starting with, sales data or whatever it might be, have all that on one tab. If you're doing any calculations, have that on a separate calculations tab. And then if you have any output, so maybe you've decided to create a chart based on that data or some kind of pivot table, have those on a separate sheet as well. So keep everything in separate tabs. Create a summary sheet with instructions. And again, I'm going to show you how this works. This is something that I very rarely see people do, but it's so helpful. It just sets out how the spreadsheet is to be used. And again, really helps people who are looking at a spreadsheet that they aren't used to seeing. Color code tabs that are related. This is a really simple thing, making sure that if you have lots of tabs in your workbook and some of those tabs are related, that you color them all the same color. So there is a visual representation there of, okay, these worksheets are kind of the same type. They belong to the same subject matter. Use formatting in your workbooks to clearly indicate input and calculation cells. So again, this is really just helping guide people to the areas of the worksheet that they're supposed to be editing and the areas that they're supposed to be leaving alone. Use absolute referencing to cut down on formula errors. Now, if I'm always surprised by people who have never heard of absolute referencing or don't know how to use it. I will show you how to use it if you're not sure. But absolute referencing is great because it really helps you cut down on if you need to change a figure in your spreadsheet. You can change it in one place as opposed to multiple other places. So you're really, again, helping to cut down on the possible errors that might be going into that spreadsheet. Controlling inputs. Again, if you really want to direct people and you don't want them touching things they're not supposed to be touching, changing calculations, you can do things like use data validation to control what's going into your spreadsheet. And you can also protect parts of the workbook that you don't want them to change. And then finally, I would always advise this to create a versions tab where you log all of the changes that you've made to the workbook. Now, all of these things we're going to go through in a demo form so you can see exactly what I mean. So let's start out with that first one, organizing our data. So I'm just going to jump across to Excel. So just bear with me one moment. All right, hopefully everybody can see that Excel spreadsheet on the screen. I'm hoping there's no lag. Please do let me know, Adam, if anybody complains of there being a lag, and I will go a bit slower. All right, so I have numerous different tabs at the bottom of this workbook, and I'm currently clicked on this data tab. Now, the information held in this data tab, this is some raw data. This is sales data for 2 different stores in the UK. So I have month, store, town, store code, and various other pieces of information. And I have the sales in column H. Now, this is quite a long set of data. If I jump down to the bottom, and to jump down to the bottom of a data set, if you press Control, down arrow, it's going to jump you to the last row. You can see it's got 21,574 rows of data. Control up arrow to jump to the top. Now, the first thing I would do, and again, this helps when it comes to designing your spreadsheets, is if you have raw data, always put it into a table. Now, I've already done that with this data, but if you're not sure how to do that, all you need to do is highlight all of your data. So click somewhere in your data, press Control A to highlight everything. And then on the home ribbon, you have a format as table drop down, and you can select any one of those styles. And essentially it will put all of your raw data into a table. And you'll know that it's in a table because then when you're clicked in it, if you look up, you'll have this Table Tools Design ribbon, which basically gives you all of the different things that you can do with this table. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, why on earth would I put it into a table? Why is that going to help me? Well, let me show you. I would always suggest as well, once you've put your data into a table, that you give your table a name. And you'll see the first group here is properties, and in table name, I've named this table sales data, okay? So give your table a name just by typing it into here and pressing enter. So my entire table now has a name, sales data, and I have 2 other spreadsheets which use this table data in the calculations. So if I jump across to calculations, you can see here I have 3 pivot tables that I've created from this data, and I've put them on a separate calculations tab. I've also got a dashboard just here using that same sales data, and this is more of a graphical representation of those calculations that I have on this tab. So you can see on the dashboard I have my sales by category, sales by town, sales by manager, and I have some slices running down the side which are interactive. So if I just want to see this data for the store Computech, I can select it in the slicer and everything is going to update. So this is a dashboard. I'm not going to go too much into how you create these. If you are interested in learning all about how to create interactive dashboards like this, I do believe we have a webinar online. Adam can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I do believe that we have a webinar on designing interactive dashboards that you can check out on our YouTube channel.
We do, correct, yeah.
Yes, and I think that's quite a nice little webinar, so definitely check that one out.
I'll try and find the link and drop it into the chat.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so saying that, these 3 tabs are essentially connected. They're of the same type. These 2 tabs are utilizing the information on this data tab. Now, the reason why I would say put things in a table is because, again, for ease of use, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Let's jump down to the last row, control down arrow. I'm going to add another row into the bottom of this table. And for quickness, I'm just literally going to copy the information above. Now, because my information is in a table, as soon as I add a new row, it becomes part of that sales data table automatically. So I'm just going to add pretty much the same information, but I am going to make the sales data, I'm going to make this pretty extreme so it's easy to see. We're going to say 1 million in here. Now, because I've put this in a table, if I go back to my dashboard, if I want that to update, instead of going in and having to change everything individually, if you look at the sales by manager down here, all I need to do is go up to my analyze, refresh all, and you'll see that that total has now updated. So what I'm saying here is that if you need to add additional figures into the bottom, if you've got it in a table, it will expand, and then all you have to do to update any charts or tables hanging off of it is just press that refresh button. So again, by doing that, you're cutting down on the amount of mistakes going into your spreadsheet. So the takeaway here is separate your data and name your tables and your ranges. The final thing I'm going to do here is, because these three tabs are related, I'm going to color code them all so they're the same color. So I'm going to select the data tab. I'm going to hold down my control key, click on calculations and click on dashboard. I'm going to right click my mouse and I'm going to select tab color, and we're going to change them to red. So straight away, I can see here, because they're all colored red, those are all related. Okay, so just think about the structure and how you're going to color code things and how you're going to organize your data. The next tip I would say would be to create something called a summary sheet. And you'll see that I have a summary sheet right at the start of this workbook. And I always tend to put my summary sheet right at the beginning. It's the first thing I want people to look at. Now, a summary sheet, if you've never seen one or used one before, is really just a set of instructions. So if I'm sharing this workbook with other people, this summary sheet tells them what I want them to do with this workbook. It doesn't leave any room for interpretation. So you could probably do this in a lot more detail than I've done here. This is just a very, very quick example. But just to show you the kinds of things you might want to put on here, I'm going through and telling them for each of the tabs what each of the tabs means or what they need to do. So you can see on the data tab, I'm saying copy and paste the figures into sales data table monthly and then refresh all the pivot tables. So someone looking at this will say, okay, I have this month's sales figures. I need to go to the data tab. I need to copy and paste the new figures into the bottom. Then I need to go to the dashboard and I need to refresh it so that those sales figures update. Okay, instruction. Calculations, it's saying perform any calculations on this tab. Dashboard, refresh it monthly. Slices can be used to filter your data. And then I also have a note in here about the versions tab saying update after any changes made to this spreadsheet. Include your initials, date, and details of the change. Now, I've only done it for 4 of my tabs, but you could go through and list out every single worksheet that you have and exactly how you want that to be used. So it gives them some guidance. What I also like to have in this initial summary sheet is I like to explain any color coding that I've used. So if I've used specific colors to highlight certain things within my spreadsheet, I like to have a little key down here. So you can see anything that's formatted like this is a heading, anything like that is a warning. Those are input cells, these are calculation cells. So this is kind of like a key for the rest of the document. So this is helpful because if somebody comes to this document and they think, okay, so anything orange is an input cell. So I'm supposed to input something into these cells. Okay, again, just helping people out. I then have some information about where to save this document. And I also have some information about versions, again, saying update the versions tab whenever a change is made. And you can go into as much detail as you like in this summary spreadsheet. Again, the idea is just to make it really simple and save you a lot of headaches. You might be looking at this thinking, well, this seems like a lot of admin to be doing for every worksheet. Now, granted, it is. And you might think, I don't want to do that. Every time I create a spreadsheet I might share, I don't want to do all of this. And you don't have to do it, but I will say that if you are sharing that, you're probably going to save yourself a lot of headaches from fixing problems, issues, answering questions, if you have this at the start of your spreadsheet. Okay, so I always think, 20 minutes of pain, and then you're saving yourself a lot of time further down the track. All right, so that's the summary sheet. Let's move on now to this VAT rate spreadsheet, because we're going to start to talk about cell styles and absolute referencing. Now, I never like to assume people know what I'm talking about when I say absolute referencing. It is probably one of the first things that you would learn in Excel once you start doing formulas, but I am always surprised how many people don't know about absolute referencing. So if you do, I apologize. The next couple of minutes might be slightly boring for you, but if you don't, let me just explain, and also in the process explain why I like to use absolute referencing in my spreadsheets. So we have a very simple data set here. We have some invoice numbers, we have some customers, we have their company, we have the invoice amount, and we need to complete the VAT and the total columns. And you can see at the top here, we have the VAT rate, which is 20%. So I need to do a calculation in here that's going to tell me what the VAT amount is. So I could say equals, I'm going to say invoice amount multiplied by, now I'm just going to type in 20%, like so. Press enter. It gives me the correct answer. Now I can drag this formula down. So by hovering over in the corner until I get that little cross, if I double click, that's going to copy that formula down. And this formula works. It's giving me the correct answer. But what I've done here is I've hard coded that number into this formula, 20%. So what if that VAT amount changes? What if next month it's 25%? I'm going to have to go in, or whoever's amending this spreadsheet is going to have to go in. They're going to have to change it within the formula. They're then going to have to copy it down. Now you might think, well, that's fine. It's not too much work. And that is true. But what if this spreadsheet is with somebody who doesn't know how to do that? What if somebody doesn't realize that you have to go in, change it in here? Maybe they don't even know how to copy formulas down quickly. Imagine if you have 200, 300 rows of data and the person you've asked to update the VAT amount doesn't realize that you can copy down, and so they spend 2 hours going into each cell individually and changing it to 25%. That's a complete waste of time for everybody. And again, it's just down to a lack of Excel knowledge. So why don't we make their lives a lot easier? Let's delete this out. Let's do this calculation again. Equals invoice amount multiplied by VAT rate. So this time we're not hard coding the number, we're using the cell reference. Now if I just leave it like that and hit enter, and then I drag this formula down by double clicking, I'm going to get some errors here. Now I have those errors because by default Excel uses relative referencing. So this first one is correct, D6 multiplied by B1, we can see what it's doing there. But because I've dragged this formula down, Excel assumes it wants to change, Excel it assumes that I want it to modify the cell references as I drag down. So if I double click on this one, you can see it's doing D7, which is fine, multiplied by B2, but B2 is a blank cell. The next one, D8, which is fine, multiplied by B3, because it's, as I'm dragging down, it's moving the cell references down. So this is where we would use absolute referencing. So let's do it again. Equals invoice amount multiplied by B1. But this time we want to tell Excel, always use cell B1, and that is absolute referencing or fixed referencing. And the quick way of fixing a reference is to press the F4 key. And you can see now it's put those dollar signs in front of the row and the column, which essentially fixes it. So now when I copy down, I get the correct answer, and every single formula is referring to cell B1. Now, the reason why I like to use that, particularly in this session for designing better spreadsheets, is that it makes it so much easier for people to update. So now if you give this spreadsheet to Sally and you ask her to update the VAT, so maybe the VAT rate has changed to 25%, she doesn't have to start messing around with any formulas where she could, maybe mess something up. All she needs to do is go to the VAT rate, change it to 25%, and it changes everywhere. So making sure you use absolute referencing really helps to cut down on the amount of errors and the amount that people are having to play around with these formulas. I can then do a very simple calculation for the total. We're doing invoice amount plus VAT amount. Enter. This one we don't need to make absolute because we're happy for it to copy down each time. And there we have our totals. I'm going to take this a stage further now. If I want to make this even clearer as to what cells can be are input cells and which cells are calculation cells, I can use something called cell styles. And you have cell styles built into Excel. So looking at my data here, the data that's going to be changed by somebody else might be the invoice number. So when a new invoice comes in, they're probably going to enter a new invoice number, new customer, company, and they'll enter in the invoice amount. So what I might want to do here is I might want to say that these, I'm going to drag this down a little bit further, are input cells. So on the home ribbon, we have a cell styles option. And this is just formatting, okay? Now, you don't necessarily have to use cell styles. I just find that they're set up, they're a little bit easier to use. So I'm going to say that these are input cells. Now, these have their own formatting, and that's quite small, so I'm just going to make that font a little bit bigger again. But it denotes them as input cells. I'm going to say that the VAT rate is also an input cell because that could change. So I'm going to go back to cell styles, input cell, and again, I'm just going to put that up. And I'm going to say that the VAT amount and the total, and I'm just going to drag this a bit further down as well to account for anything else that we're adding in. These are going to be calculation cells. So again, just to make them look different, I'm going to go to cell styles and I'm going to say that they're calculation cells. Like so. Okay, so just with a little bit of formatting, I can see input cells versus calculation cells. And if you remember back on our summary sheet, I have that there. Input cell is in orange, calculation cell is gray with orange font. So it makes it easier for people to see, okay, I need to input into here. Okay, so think about using color coding to guide people towards where they're supposed to enter information. Now, you could take this to a completely new level. What you could do is you could actually lock the cells that you don't want them to change. So it might be that I want to completely lock these calculation cells so that people can't type in them at all. They can only type in these orange input cells. Now, when it comes to locking cells, this is something that I find really confuses people. And I do admit it is confusing, it is slightly backwards. When you're locking certain parts of worksheets, the thing you have to remember in Excel is that by default, every single cell in Excel is locked. Now, you might think, how can that be? Because I can click anywhere in this spreadsheet and I can enter in information. If the cell is locked, why can I do that? Well, let me show you. If I right-click on a cell and go to Format Cells and go to the Protection tab, you can see it's telling me the cell is locked. And any cell I clicked on, it would show as locked. The locking doesn't take effect until you protect the worksheet. Okay, so you need to remember that concept. Everything is locked, but you can input because you haven't protected the worksheet. So essentially what we want to do here is I want to have these as locked cells, but have these as unlocked cells. So I'm going to select the cells that I don't want to lock. So I'm going to select all of the input cells, so the orange cells. I'm also going to select, by holding down Control, this VAT rate cell. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to Format Cells, and I'm going to say Unlock. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect the entire worksheet. So we're going to go up to Review, Protect Sheet. Now you don't have to put a password on. I am, in this case. It's going to ask me to enter it again. So now what you'll see is that if I try and make a change to the formulas in VAT amount or total, as soon as I start to type, it's telling me it's protected, so I can't get to those formulas. However, I can come to invoice amount and I can change it. And you'll see it's letting me change those input cells. The calculations are still updating, but the person, whoever's entering this, cannot get in to mess around with those formulas. I can also go to VAT rate, change that to 30%, and you'll see that everything will update. So this is a really nice way of directing people to where they can enter information in and protecting information that you don't want changed. So think about that again when you're designing your spreadsheets. It's really going to cut down on the amounts of errors you find in your spreadsheets.
Can I dive in, Debs?
Yeah.
Just in case anyone's wondering what VAT is, I know a lot of people joining us are outside the UK. It stands for value added tax. It's sales tax, basically. So something that you put on an invoice. I'm sure you'd worked that out already, but if you hadn't, that's what VAT is in the UK. And yes, unbelievably, it is 20% on everything, which is horrible. But anyway, back to Debs.
Thank you for that, Adam. Yeah, sorry about that. I forget that we have people from all around the world and some people may not know what VAT is. So thank you for that, Adam. All right. So what I might want to do now is that now that I've made some changes to this spreadsheet, I might want to update my summary sheet. So I might want to go back to my summary sheet, go up to here, and I might want to add something in that says VAT rate, so we're referring to that spreadsheet, change the VAT rate in cell B1 only. Okay, and just for consistency, let's just make that bold, like so. So again, I'm telling them if you need to change the VAT rate on the VAT rate, only change it in cell B1. You don't need to go into the calculations and change it. So it's just making things super clear for everybody to understand. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone so far. Let's jump across to invoices. Now this is on a similar vein. We're going to do a couple of similar things to what we've just done, but I always think it's worth going over that protection twice because, as I said, people do find that slightly confusing. But we're going to get a little bit fancier here. We're going to do some data validation. Now, let me explain what I mean by data validation. What I have here, again, is just a sample client invoices, and we need to fill out the invoice number, invoice date, client amount, VAT, and total into this spreadsheet. So I'm going to start with just an invoice number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to say invoice date, let's just say 1st of the 1st, 2020. Now, client. Now, I might type in the name of the client, so we'll say Northwind Traders. Now, if somebody else is adding in the client name, they might come in here and they might type Northwind Traders. They might make a spelling mistake. So as far as Excel is concerned, these are two different clients. And sometimes it's very hard to notice if someone's made a tiny spelling error. And if you're doing any kind of analysis on your data, things like this can really mess up your data. So what you might want to do here to make sure that every single time a client name is put into this spreadsheet, it's the same and it's correct, is you might want to utilize a data validation list. So let me show you what I mean by that. What I like to have is if I'm inputting a list of clients, and this could be something else, it doesn't have to be clients, I will have a separate spreadsheet called clients where I keep a client list. And I'll always keep this client list updated. And if I get new clients, I will add them to the bottom of this list. So what I want to do is in this invoices spreadsheet, I want to have a little drop down which will list out all of the clients in that clients list, and I can just select from the drop down. And again, makes it really easy for anybody to do, and it ensures that you're not getting spelling errors and different things going into your spreadsheet. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We use data validation to create the list, but we're going to do something a little bit fancier. I want to make this data validation list a dynamic data validation list. So what I mean by that is that every time I get a new client and I add new clients onto the bottom here, I want the data validation list to automatically update to include the new clients. Okay, and it isn't obvious how you do this in Excel, which is why I want to show you because I think it's so useful. So let's jump across to our client list. First thing we need to do is we need to select all of our client lists, Control A, and we need to put it into a table. Remember at the beginning I said tables are useful for many reasons. So I'm going to go to Home, I'm going to go to Format as Table, and I'm just going to select, you can select any one of these. It's going to say, where is your data? And I can see it's selected my data range. My table does have headers. Okay. So my data is now in a table. Now, the second thing I need to do here, and this is what confuses people, is I need to name this range. So actually, let me just name this table first of all. So on our Table Tools Design ribbon, we have table name. I'm going to name this Client List and hit Enter. Now, my table only has one column. You may have other information about your clients in a table, so you may have multiple different columns. So the next thing you really need to do is you need to specify which data in your table you want to include in your data validation dropdown. So for me, it's going to be this data just here, but if you have a much larger table, it could be a column that you have over here, it could be a column just here. Okay, so whatever you want to be in your data validation list, highlight it. So just going to highlight. Now I'm not highlighting the title client list because I don't want that to appear in my data validation dropdown. Now, once I've highlighted this list, I'm going to name the range. Okay, so we've already named the table. I'm now naming this range of cells. And we name a range of cells just by clicking in this name box. So I'm going to go up to here and I'm just going to say, let's say companies, like that. Hit Enter. That step is really important in order for this data validation to work. Let's jump back to invoices, and we're now going to create our data validation drop-down list. I'm going to go up to data. I'm going to go to this data tools area, and this little button just here is my data validation button. I'm going to click the drop-down, select data validation. And what we're doing is we are creating a drop-down list. So I'm going to select list for my validation criteria. It's now saying, okay, what's the source? What do you want me to include in this list? So I want to pull through that range of cells that I named. So I'm going to say equals, and then a quick little tip for pulling up any ranges that you have in your spreadsheet is to press the F3 key. So you can see I have a few different ranges in this workbook, but the top one there is companies, which is the range I want to use. Like so. Click on OK. You can now see that I have a drop-down arrow just here, and it's listing out all of the companies from that list. Now, if I want to utilize this in each cell, I can drag it down for as far as I want to go, so that every cell I click in is going to have this data validation drop down. So I could go in, select a company. I know it's going to be correct every time I input it into the cell. Now let's take a look at the dynamic part in action. So if we look at our list so far, it ends at company H. If I jump back to our client's list, company H is the last one. What if I add a new company into the bottom here? So if I just click in cell A10 and let's add company X, hit enter. Because I put this in a table, the table automatically expands to accommodate the new company. If I go back to my invoices drop down, you'll see company X has automatically been added to the bottom of that list. Okay, so it's a really efficient, dynamic way of keeping one centralized list and having it update in your data validation. So now every time somebody enters in a company, it's going to be exactly the same every single time. You're cutting down on errors. Okay, there's lots of little things that you can do using data validation in your spreadsheets. That's just one example. Let's go through and complete some other details. So I'm going to say the amount of this invoice is 500. We need to work out the VAT again. So I'm going to say equals 500 multiplied by, we're going to use our cell reference and we're going to make it absolute, F4. Enter. We're going to do our basic total calculation, D4 plus D4 to get our total. And again, if you're going to be completing lots of invoices, you can copy these formulas down as far as you want to go. Oops, sorry, don't want to do that. I'm going to leave that as it is. I don't want to do that because it's just going to put 500 in there. Okay, so we have our first line complete. Now, again, what I might want to do is I might want to lock certain parts of this spreadsheet. So again, this is what we did previously. I'm going to show you it again because it's really important. You're going to select the cells and apply formatting so people know which cells are input cells and which cells are calculation cells. So I'm going to say that these are all input cells. So we're going to go to Home, Cell Styles, Input Cells. And these ones are calculation cells. And we're going to select calculation. Now it's worth noting in here, if you don't like the way that these look, you can create your own cell styles if you want to. Now that's an entirely different thing which we could cover in a different webinar, but you can create your own cell styles if you don't particularly like the formatting of these standard ones. All right. But again, because we have on that summary sheet a key that's saying input calculation, it makes it really easy for people to understand where they need to enter different things. I'm going to change that VAT to an input cell as well. And then again, of course, we could go through and we could lock different parts of this spreadsheet. So I want people to be able to enter into these cells, hold down Control, and I want them to be able to change the VAT rate. So I'm going to unlock these cells. Format cells, take the check out of the box. And then I need to protect the worksheet. So go to Review, Protect Sheet. And there we go. So again, if I was to try and go in and modify these formulas, it's not going to work, but I can still input things into these calculation cells, and I can use my data validation and whatever else I need to do. Okay, so really, really simple to do things like that. Hopefully that makes sense. And you're getting an idea as to how you can really kind of shepherd people towards the areas of the spreadsheet you want them to work in, and also protect the areas that you don't want them to touch. It's going to save you so many headaches going forward. Now the final, actually, before we move on to the final thing, because invoices and clients are also related, I'm going to do exactly the same thing and color code these tabs. So I'm going to hold down Control, select invoices and clients, right click and change the tab color so that they're both the same. The final tab we have here is a versions tab. And again, this is a little bit admin-y, but something that's well worth doing. I would always have at the end of a spreadsheet a version tab to keep track of any changes that have been made. And again, you can kind of set this up however you want. I've just done a very basic example. But you can see here I have version numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the date, a description of the change that was made to the workbook, and who made that particular change. So I might want to jump in here and just say, okay, so number 6, let's say what's today's date? So the 16th of April, I keep thinking it's 2019 still, 2020. And then I might want to say that I have, what have we done? Updated, added a new client to clients worksheet. And then I'm going to add my name. And again, with this, you could have data validation lists. If you don't want to keep typing in the same names each time, you could set up a different tab. You could have the name of all the people in your company. You could create a data validation list so that people can just select the name from a drop down. Now, it looks like I need to apply some formatting to this one just here. Not quite sure what's going on there. There we go. Okay. All right, so we're just keeping track of all of the changes that we're making. Something else you might want to have are links. So you can see here I've had little links area. I have links to, or clickable links to, all of the different worksheets. So this makes it easy to navigate around. So if I want to quickly jump to the data worksheet, I can click on the data worksheet link and it's going to take me there. Okay, so really useful for navigation, particularly if you have a large or a lot of different worksheets. Now, I'll just show you very briefly how you can create links to different worksheets so you can bounce around and navigate efficiently. It's very simple. For example, if I want to create a link to clients, I'm going to go up to the Insert ribbon. I'm going to go to Link. And you'll see here it says Text to Display. So I'm going to say Clients Worksheet. You can say which cell you want it to jump to. Now, I don't need it to jump to any particular cell, just the worksheet. So I'm going to leave it on A1. But I want this one to jump to clients. And you can see that I'm clicked on place in this document, and it's going to show me all of the tabs I have in this current document. And click on OK. And I've created a little link there. If I click it, it's going to jump me to my client's worksheet. I could go further. Let's do another one. I'm going to go up to link again. This one is going to say versions worksheet. Now we're on the versions worksheet. So just to make it a bit different, I'm going to say, when you click it, jump to cell, let's say A20 of the versions worksheet. And I'm going to add a screen tip. So in here, I'm going to add some descriptive text. So I'm going to say, make sure you update the versions worksheet when you make a change. Click on OK. Click on OK again. So I have my link. If I hover over the link, you see I get that screen tip. Make sure you update the versions worksheet when you make a change. So we're adding in more instruction in different ways into this worksheet. Now, we're already on the versions worksheet, but what you should see is when I click this, you should see that it will highlight cell A20 because that's what we selected. And there we go, it does. All right, so links are a great way to navigate around your spreadsheets. Now, versions and summary, because they're kind of instructional, I'm going to link these two together as well. So I'm going to select both of them. And I'm going to change the tab color for these, and I'm going to make them yellow, as those are my kind of instructional tabs. VAT rate is more of a random one on its own, so I'm just going to give that the color green. Okay, so using color coding, again, you could tell people on your summary worksheet what you've done, that all the tabs that are the same color are related so that people understand what they're looking at. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of some new things that you can do to start designing your spreadsheets in a better way. The final thing I'm going to show you before we finish up with some questions is if we jump to the, where are we? Calculations tab just here. you'll notice that I have a button. And if I click this button, it says jump to dashboard. It's going to jump me to that dashboard worksheet. And again, this is just a link. Now, you might want to add these into your spreadsheet to make it really simple for other people entering things onto this spreadsheet. So let me show you an example. In this invoices, if Sally down the corridor is entering in her invoices and she gets to this clients drop down and she's looking through and she thinks, oh, my client that I need isn't listed here. What do I do? She might not know what she needs to do. So what you could do is put a nice button on here that says add new client. So she might think, oh, okay, if I click this button, it's going to help me. So let's put a button on. And for this, all we need to do is, oh, I'm thinking, why is everything grayed out? It's because I protected the worksheet earlier. So I'm going to unprotect the sheet like so. There we go. I'm going to draw my button. Insert, it's just a shape. I'm going to choose rounded rectangle and I'm just going to draw out this little button like so. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say edit text and I'm going to add the text, add new client. I'm just going to do some formatting to make this look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to want to center that text both vertically and horizontally. And I might want to make this a little bit bigger so it's a bit more obvious, maybe make it bold. Okay, so there we have a little button. So what I might want to do is link this to the client's worksheet. So it's exactly the same as what we did before. It's just a hyperlink. I'm going to select the button. I'm going to right click this time. And you can see I have a link option just here. Takes us to that same box. So I'm going to make sure I have place in this document selected. I'm going to say clients is the worksheet we want to link to. I'm going to say OK. All right. So now if Sally's working in this spreadsheet and she thinks, oh, my client isn't there, she's going to look across. She's going to see add new client. She can click this button. It's going to jump her to here and she's going to think, oh, OK, I need to go in here and add my new client onto the bottom, like so. Because we've got that data validation working, it becomes part of the table. She can jump back to invoices and her new client is automatically updated in the list. Okay, adding all of these things just makes it so much easier for everybody using your spreadsheet. And once you know a few little tips and tricks here and there, it makes your life a lot easier further down the track. All right, that is pretty much everything that I wanted to show you. I just want to finish off by just recapping those takeaways from this session. So the takeaways: separate your data, input, calculations, output, all on different tabs, and color code tabs of similar type or tabs that are related. Name your tables and your ranges. You've seen how that can really help you when it comes to updating. Create a summary sheet at the beginning with detailed instructions on how to use your spreadsheet, what's an input cell, what's not, what the colors mean, how each tab is supposed to be used. Make it easy for people. Use formatting to denote input versus calculation cells. Remember, you can use those inbuilt cell styles, or you can create your own color coding. Protect the cells you don't want to be changed. So if you have loads of formulas and you don't want people touching them, protect those cells. Use things like data validation to control the data going into the spreadsheet. It will cut down on spelling errors and it will make any analysis you do a lot easier. Add version control to keep track of changes so you can understand the different stages that the worksheet has gone through and you can see who has made what change in case you need to ask them about it. Use buttons and hyperlinks for easy navigation. Make it easy for people. add a button that says add new client, add a button that says jump to this spreadsheet if they need to go there. Okay, think about your spreadsheets in this way. As I said, I know it seems like it's a lot of admin, but it's really going to save yourself so much hassle further down the track, even for yourself. Some spreadsheets I've created, maybe I don't use them for another 6 months. And then when I come back to them, if I've put no instruction in there whatsoever, I might look at that spreadsheet and think, I don't even know what I was doing. I can't remember from 6 months ago. So for myself, I like to make sure that I have everything in there so I can pick up that spreadsheet and use it straight away. All right, everybody, welcome. I hope you're having a great evening, morning, wherever you're joining us from today. It's absolutely freezing in the UK today. I am absolutely cold as anything sitting here. So hopefully my hands don't freeze as we're going through this session today. So let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through a little bit about what exactly is a dashboard, why is it going to be useful, and the best way to illustrate that really is to just show you a completed dashboard example. So we're going to start straight off the bat by showing you a completed version. Please don't judge my design skills, that's all I'll say. We'll then run through some data preparation and organization tips. So this is just going to help you be a little bit more organized, because dashboards can get really complex and you might find yourself with lots and lots of different tabs. So we want to try and organize that as best as we can. I'm then going to go through creating a wireframe. Now, this isn't something that is essential, but it is a good idea to kind of have a plan as to what you want to go onto your dashboard before you even begin. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to jump into actually setting up or creating the information that we want to put on our dashboard. And the dashboard we're going to create today is pretty heavy on pivot tables and charts. So if you love pivot tables as much as I do, then you're probably going to really, really enjoy this. We're going to create 4 different pivot tables and 4 different pivot charts. We're going to create ourselves a line chart, a map chart, a bar chart, and a donut chart. I'm also going to show you how you can incorporate calculations using formulas onto your dashboard as well. So you can sort of really see the potential and the flexibility that you have when you're creating dashboards in Excel. We're then going to go through and we're going to bring it all together. We're going to assemble our dashboard, and then we're going to go through some basic formatting. That's a step that in the real world, formatting your dashboard is very important. You want it to look really nice, really modern, really slick. I don't have a great deal of time, so I'm not going to be making this look amazing. We're just going to be doing some basic formatting. I'm going to show you how you can add interactivity to your to your dashboard using slicers. And then the final thing I'm going to show you is how you can update everything on your dashboard with the click of one button. So that is pretty much all we're going to have time to go through today. So let's get started. Now, as I mentioned, let's talk about what exactly is a dashboard. So let me just switch to my completed example. So a dashboard is really just kind of a report that helps you display important data or information in a single place so that your audience can easily see key metrics or statistics that are important to them. And that's one thing that is really important. When you're designing dashboards, you need to think to yourself, what questions am I trying to answer with this dashboard? What do people want to know? What does my audience want to know? So we're going to build like a sales dashboard. And this is built off of downloaded sales data. So if I'm presenting these key metrics to maybe my team leader, what's of most interest to them? What do they want to know from this dashboard? And you can see here, this is a completed version of the dashboard that we're going to build today. I am going to change it very slightly because I really don't like the formatting on some of this. So we'll do it slightly different, but this is sort of roughly what we're going to do. And let's just run through it very quickly so you know exactly what you're looking at. So at the top here, we just have a title. And then you can see that we have these sort of key statistics running across the top in pink. So things like the most profitable item, the most profitable region, the number of cancelled orders, and the top sales channel as well. And all of these results underneath, where we have cosmetics, sub-Saharan Africa, so on and so forth, these are all linked back to our original data, so that when the data changes, these will also update accordingly. So I'm going to show you how you can build that type of thing into your dashboard. And then underneath that, we really just have 4 different pivot charts. And I built these in slightly different ways. You can have much more than that on a dashboard, not necessarily just pivot tables or pivot charts. You can do whatever you like on your dashboard. And one thing I would say is if you are sort of fairly new to dashboard design, it's always good to sort of go away and take a look at what other people are doing. And one source that I always go to if I'm thinking, how do I design this dashboard, or I'm trying to give myself some inspiration, I always jump onto sites like Pinterest. So if we go to Pinterest, I've got it open over here, and just type in Excel dashboard design, you can see that you're just going to get tons of these come up, which can give you a really good idea as to how you might want to structure your dashboard. So you can see here we have just an example of a financial dashboard that someone's created. We've got the KPIs listed down the side, and then we have a whole bunch of charts showing different important key metrics. So it's always worth having a look through sites like Pinterest just to give yourself some inspiration. So, saying all of that, what else do we need to be aware of on here? Well, as I said, all of this is built from one data set. And that data set is this tab down here, sales data. Now, this is just a data set that I've downloaded from online. And it's just pure sales data. We have regions, countries, we have the item type that's being sold, the sales channel, whether it's offline or online, priority, and then we have some dates and we have some values. So things like units sold, total revenue, total profit, so on and so forth. So this is a really good meaty data set. We have about 5,000 rows of data. So if I jump to the bottom, control down arrow, first little shortcut key just there, you can see 5001. If we account for the heading, that's 5,000 rows of data. So this is a fairly sizable data set that we're going to use to build this dashboard. Now, one thing that you should be aware of, first of all, is that I've already sort of skipped ahead a little bit because this data set is already nice and tidy. It's nice and consistent. And a lot of the time, depending on where you're getting your data from, you might be downloading it from a third-party system, maybe you're bringing it in from a website. Data doesn't always come across in the perfect format. So we might have to go through and utilize Excel functions to clean it up a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go through any of the cleaning data stuff in this particular session because we did do the webinar on cleaning data, I think either last month or the month before. So if you want to know some of those cleaning data techniques, you can always go back on the Simon Says It website and take a look at that webinar. So our data is already clean. It's already ready for us to analyze. And I've already put it in a table. And this is a really important point. If you want your dashboard to update with the click of one button, you want to make sure that you put your source data in a table. Now, mine's already in a table. How do I know that? Well, I can see that if I take a look at my ribbons, I can see the table design ribbon. So that tells me that my data is in a table. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be able to see that ribbon. So make sure that your data is in a table. If you're not sure how to do that, you can simply click somewhere in your data and press Control T on your keyboard. Mine won't do it because it's already in a table. Control T is the keyboard shortcut to put it into a table. Now, another thing that's really important when you're working with things like this is to make sure that you name your table. And this brings me on to my first sort of talking point, really, which is about standardizing your naming conventions when you're working in Excel. And this really just ties into being a lot more organized than you might normally be. For example, I'm clicked in my table of data. If I take a look up on that table design ribbon, can you see the first group where we have properties? I have table name, and then I've named my table TBL_sales_data. So just by looking at this table name, I know that it's a table because it says TBL, and I know it's related to sales data. And you'll see that whenever I name a table in Excel, I always start with TBL so that I know that it's a table. if I have a chart, I might name the chart CHT and then a name. If it's a pivot table, I might name it PVT and then the name. Now, the reason why it's so important to have like a standard naming convention so it's easy to identify the different elements in your dashboard is because it's going to make your life a lot easier when we start having to link our tables and our charts to things like slices. It's going to be easier for you to identify them. So it's good to get into the habit of naming everything correctly as we start to go through. Now, what else do I want to highlight before we actually get into building our dashboard? We're going to talk about wireframes in a moment. So yes, let's talk about that now. I've got a tab at the bottom called wireframe. Now, this might look a little bit strange, but bear with me on this one, because you have to think to yourself, okay, how am I going to design my dashboard? So before you even begin, you want to make sure that you make a note of exactly what you want to display on that dashboard. Maybe I want to see the average gross sales by country. Maybe I want to see how much profit we've made each month. Maybe I want to see our sales broken down by products so that we can see which are the best performing products and which are the worst, which is going to allow us to make informed decisions when it comes to which products we're selling next year. So sit down and think about the metrics that you actually want to display on the dashboard first of all. Once you have that, start to think about how you want to lay out your dashboard. Where do you want things to go? Where do you want your charts to go? Where do you want your slices to go? Which parts do you want formatted? Things like that. Now, you can do this very quickly just by doing it on a piece of paper. I tend to like to do it in a tab in Excel like I've done here. So I've just used shapes to basically sketch out a plan of how my dashboard is going to look when I start to add my charts and other things in. So I've got my header at the top. I'm going to have some summary statistics at the top. I'm going to have my slices next, and then I've got different spaces for the different charts that we're going to use. So think about that when you're designing your dashboard, or think about it before you start to design it so that you can design it in the best way possible. Okay, so we call that a wireframe. It's really just planning out how your dashboard is going to look. Another thing that you might want to think about when we are starting to think about our dashboard is the use of color in your dashboard. Now, again, as I said, don't judge me on my design just here. I'm not saying that this is a great design or anything. It's something I whipped up very quickly. I'm sure you can put together something that looks a lot nicer than this. But also make sure that if you work for a company who maybe has branded colors, make sure that you're using your theme colors in your dashboard so that everything ties into your company branding. And again, you might have those set up automatically by your IT team when you open up Excel at your workplace, or you might have to create your own themes in Excel. Those are outside of the scope of today's session, but it's just something else to be aware of, the use of color in your spreadsheets. Now, just on that same topic, also notice the way that I've used color to kind of separate different groups of things in this workbook. So if you look at the bottom, if you look at my tabs, can you see that the first two tabs there are colored in this dark pink? So this is basically my data tabs. So I have my sales data on this tab, and then I have some extra data on the next tab. I've then got my wireframe, that's a different color. And then I have these other tabs that are all in blue because they're all kind of the same thing. Each one of these tabs has on it one of the charts that I've used on the dashboard. So I can see all of those on individual worksheets. We then have our calculations tab. I'm going to talk you through this in a moment. And then finally, we have our dashboard. So I've separated everything out and I've used color to make it easier and easier for me to organize all of these different tabs that I have, because this is a very straightforward dashboard. If it's a lot more complicated, you're going to have way more tabs than I do here. Okay, so all of these things you need to be aware of. So do I want to mention anything else? Let's actually, no, I'll talk about calculations when we get to that. Now, I'm just going to close down this file because this was just the completed version. So let's close that down. And I'm just going to reopen the one that I sent you guys. So just bear with me 1 second. And I think I sent you the workbook, didn't I? Yeah. All right. So this file looks slightly different to the one that we were just looking at. I've still got my sales data in a table on the first tab. I've got some extra data, which we're going to use a bit later on. I've got my wireframe just there. I have my calculations and I have my dashboard, which at the moment looks pretty bare. Now, we're going to build up this dashboard. I've already started doing it, again, just to save a bit of time. All I've done here for this heading is I've basically just resized this row by dragging it down, and I've just applied some formatting to the cell. So that's all I've done, and then I've added the text. Now, one thing I would say is that when you're putting together a dashboard, you want it to kind of look as clean and professional as possible. So I always come in here and turn off the grid lines just so I'm starting from a blank canvas and all of my charts look really nice and we don't have these grid lines showing in the background. So let's jump up to the View tab, and I'm going to, in the Show group where we have grid lines, I'm going to deselect, and that's just going to get rid of all of those grid lines and give me a nice blank canvas. So let's start by doing a couple of design changes here, because what I'm going to have is I've got this title at the top, and underneath that, I'm going to have an area where I have my slices. Now, if you're not sure what slices are, they're basically just filters. They're interactive filters you can use to filter your data. I'm going to have some of these at the top of the page. So I'm going to grab row 2. You can see I've got that double-headed arrow. I'm just going to drag it down to allow some room for my slices. So slices aren't that big. I think that should be fine. And just so this stands out, I'm going to change the background fill just to a light grey colour. So this is where I'm going to have my slices. Now, underneath that, I'm going to have some top-level or high-level key metrics that people are interested in. So we're going to add those in at the end. In fact, yeah, we're not going to do those just yet. We're just going to leave our dashboard as it is. Because what we need to do is we need to start constructing our pivot tables and our pivot charts that we want to go on this dashboard. So let's go back to our sales data, and we're going to create our first pivot table and pivot chart. And we're going to create a line chart, which is going to show us the total profit by year. So I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked in my data. We're going to jump up to the Insert ribbon, and the first button here is Pivot Table. So let's click that. I'm going to be creating my pivot table based off of my table range, and you can see here it's automatically selected it for me, which is perfect. And I'm going to put it on a new worksheet. Now, I would say when you're doing a dashboard, if you've got lots of different pivot tables and pivot charts, you want to make sure you put each one on a new worksheet so that it doesn't get confused with your source data or anything else that you have going on. So I'm going to say, put it on a new worksheet, click on OK. And there we go. I have a new sheet at the bottom, sheet 1, and I'm just going to drag and I'm going to move this to just before where we have dashboard. So now I have a blank pivot table report, which I need to populate with fields. And before I do that, I'm going to make sure that I name everything on here so that I'm being consistent. So the first thing we're going to rename is the worksheet. So currently it just says sheet 1. Let's right click and go to rename. And this is going to be a line chart. So I'm just going to say, this is the pivot table. So PVT underscore, I'm going to call it line chart. I'm also going to make sure that I'm clicked in this blank pivot table report. And if you notice just above where we have pivot table name, it still has the generic name of pivot table 1. So I'm going to name this PVT underscore line underscore chart. Perfect. So what is our first pivot chart going to display? Well, it's going to display the profits by year. So if we cast our eyes over to the right-hand side, we have our pivot table fields. Now, if you're not that familiar with pivot tables, they are really straightforward. What you see here in this pivot table fields area are basically all of the column headings from our source data. So we've got region, country, item type, sales channel, so on and so forth. And we build up our pivot table simply by dragging and dropping any one of these fields into one of these 4 areas down here. And depending on where we drag them, our report is going to display in a different way. So I'm doing a line chart, profit by year. I'm going to I'm going to find total profit. Where is it? There it is. I'm going to drag it down into values. And in the rows, I'm going to go for, let's go for order date. I'm going to drop that down into rows. So you can now see what I have in my pivot table. It's showing me the years, 2015 to 2022, which is what my data set spans, and then the sum of total profit. Now, at the moment, it doesn't look great. It's not really organized as I want it to be, because what happened, if you notice in our pivot table fields, when I dropped in order date, Excel automatically split up my date for me. So it recognized that we have years, we have quarters, and we have the order date. So if I expand 2015, you can see I can break this down into quarters and then the months. So Excel did that automatically for me. Now, in this particular scenario, I only want to see the years. I'm not interested in quarters or anything else. So what I can do is go down to rows, and I'm going to drag quarters out and also order date just to leave the years. I'm probably going to want to apply a little bit of number formatting to this total profit column as well, because it looks kind of messy. So once again, we can just click in this column, right click, and go to number format. And this is the total profit. I'm going to give it accounting format. I'm going to take those decimal places down to 0 and click on OK. So that looks a little bit tidier. So that is our first pivot table. Now from this pivot table, I want to create a line chart. Now, what do I want to include in my line chart? Well, pretty much all of this information, but I don't want to include the grand total. That's not going to make sense. So I'm going to turn off the grand total for this particular pivot table. So once again, I need to make sure I'm clicked inside the pivot table. We're going to go up to the Design tab, into the Layout group, Grand Totals, and we're going to say Off for rows and columns. So now I just have the data that I want to include in that line chart. So once we have our pivot table, we can go to Pivot Table Analyze, Pivot Chart, and then we can choose our chart type. Now, I will say when you're creating charts, not all charts are created equally. Some charts are more suited to certain types of data. But I would say that column charts in general are suitable for most types of data. But if you have time-based data like we do here, 2015 to 2022, that's often nicely represented in the form of a line chart. And I want my line chart to have markers. So I'm going to choose line with markers, that option just above, just to give myself those little markers on the year points. Let's click on OK, and we have ourselves a pivot chart. Now, there's a lot of formatting we could do here to make this look really fancy. As I said, we don't have a great deal of time to go through formatting, but I am going to do a few different things with this. Now, the first thing that I always do in general when I'm working with pivot charts, because I want them to look as clean as possible. I don't want them to be too fussy. So I'm going to remove these gray filter buttons, because if I want to filter the charts on my dashboard, I'm going to use a slicer, or I could come here and use the pivot table. So I'm going to right click on the gray buttons, and I'm going to say hide all field buttons on chart, just to get rid of those. What else can I get rid of? Well, let's take a look at this total, the legend over here. That's not really showing me any information. So I'm going to get rid of this. And the thing is, with things like the legend, they are simply text boxes. So I can just select it and press the delete key just to get rid of that legend. I might want to add a little title. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about these chart titles because I'm actually going to give them all different chart titles when we put them on the dashboard. But just so I remember what this chart represents, this is the, let's say, total profit by year. That'll do for now. And of course, I could do other types of formatting. So currently those markers don't really stand out too much. So maybe I want to change the color scheme that I'm using in here. So I can go up to the Design tab, and I'm going to go to Change Colors, and let's make this a purple color. And if I wanted to change the chart style, I could maybe choose something from up here. I've got all different kinds of choices. So let's go for that one. That looks quite nice. And I think I'm going to leave it like that. Now, currently, take a look at this line. And we can see very clearly that there was a massive dip in profits in 2017. So this is why visualizing our data in this type of way is really useful, because maybe if I'm the salesperson, I might want to investigate a little bit further as to why we had such a large dip in sales in that year in particular. Now, if you wanted to, for example, I've got a lot of space in between that point and all of this down here. I've got this big old blank space. If I wanted to make this line a little bit more centered on this particular chart, I could change the way that this axis looks. Now, if I right click on the axes and go to Format Axes, this is where I could change things like the bounds. So you can see here where it says minimum, it starts at 0. So if I didn't want this line to appear so high up in that plot area, I could maybe change this to something like 100. Is it 100,000 or it's 100 million? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I click away, you can see that that's going to pull it down, and it just looks a little bit nicer on the actual chart. So you can change things like that as you go through. So that is my first chart, profit by year. Let's move on to a slightly more interesting chart. Now, if you are building lots of pivot charts to put on a dashboard, one thing we want to be making sure that we're doing this as efficiently as possible. So in general, what I do is I will copy the worksheet, delete out the chart, and then just change the pivot table. I find that's quicker than having to go back to the sales data and create a brand new pivot chart from there. So a quick way to copy this particular worksheet that we're on is to hold down the Control key, click, and just drag off to the side. When you let go, you're going to get an exact copy. So I'm going to right click and let's rename this, because the next one we're doing is we're doing a pivot table, and this is going to be a map. So now I can simply just delete out that chart and then rearrange my pivot table fields, because I want to display a different metric in this chart. So this time I want to see the average units sold by country. So I don't need years in rows. I don't need the total profit in values. What I want instead is units sold down here. And I want this by country. So let's grab the country field and drop that into rows. Now we have a lot of information here. There's a lot of countries in there. Now, because of the type of chart that we're doing, that's absolutely fine. We're doing a map chart, which basically just colorizes the country on a map. I wouldn't have this much data if I was doing something like a column chart, because can you imagine the axes with this? It would be absolutely horrendous and nobody would be able to read it. So that is what I mean by not every chart is suitable for the data that you want to represent. So we're doing a map chart, so this is absolutely fine to leave this in a big long list. But what else do I want to do here? Right, notice that it's showing the sum of the units sold, whereas I want it to display the average units sold by country. So how can I change this from doing a sum to doing an average? Well, there's a few different ways, but we can go down to our values area in our pivot table fields, click the little drop down arrow and go to value field settings. So this is where we can choose how this field is summarized. So currently it's doing a sum. I want it to do an average. Let's click on OK. And now it's showing me the average of the units sold. Once again, I want to apply some number formatting. Right click, number format. And these are just numbers. It's just the number of units sold. It's not currency. So we're going to take the decimal places down and click on OK. And now I have my average units sold by country. Once again, I'm going to go up to Pivot Table Analyze and I'm going to name this table. Because we copied the sheet, notice it's still called PVT line chart, but we want this to be called PVT map. Map chart. So now that we have this data, I want to represent it in a map chart. But there is one issue that you're going to come across. So let's take a look at it. Let's go to Pivot Table Analyze, Pivot Chart, and one of the chart types in here is map. Now notice what I get. I get a little message. You can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. And that's really important. If you want to use pivot table data in a map chart, you have to pull it out of the pivot table first of all, which is a little bit of a pain. Fortunately, it is quite simple. All we need to do is click somewhere in the data, Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and I'm just going to paste it over here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paste the values only. So up on the home ribbon, click the lower half of the paste button, and we're going to say paste values. So that gives me all of the data, but it's not in a pivot table anymore. So what I can then do with this selected is create just a regular map chart. So this time we're going to insert into maps and filled map. And depending on how much data you've got, this can take a couple of seconds for it to pull through everything, but that is what we get. So you can see here that the countries are kind of shaded in a gradient fill depending on the number of units sold. So the darker the fill, the higher the number of units sold. And this is quite a nice way of representing geographical data. Now, the problem that we have here, because we've now created this chart based off of data that isn't in a pivot table, if this data was to update, the chart isn't going to change. So once we've created the chart, we then need to point it back to the pivot table data. So with it selected, we're going to go up to the chart design ribbon, select data. I'm going to delete out the data range that we're using, and I'm just going to go back and select columns A and B. So it's now going to use the pivot table data again. So it's a bit of a pain. You can't create it from pivot data, but you can point it back to use that data. Once we've done that, I can then go in and delete out everything that we have in here. So a little bit of a workaround there to get your map charts to work based off of your pivot data. So once again, let's do a little bit of formatting. There isn't a great deal that we can do with map charts, but if we go up to the chart design tab, I'm going to choose a different chart style. Let's go for something like that. Looks a little bit nicer. I'm also going to change the colors. We've got a purple theme going on. Let's make it purple. And just so I remember, I'm going to name this. This is the average units. Oops, I can't type tonight. My hands are so cold. By country. There we go. So there is chart number 2, which we're going to put on our dashboard. How are we doing for time, guys? Oh, not too bad. I thought I would be later than that. Let's do our third chart, which is going to be a bar chart. Oh, before we do that, I want to make sure that I name my pivot chart. Oh no, we can't name this one because, sorry, ignore what I just said there. We're going to go on to creating our third chart. So once again, I'm going to grab the tab and I'm going to make a copy. Now this map chart, because it's using so much data, this can be a little bit slow. So I'm going to copy the line chart again. So let's hold down Control, drag and drop it where we want it to be so that we get our copy. I'm going to right click, I'm going to rename, and we're going to call this one, what are we calling this one? Pivot, so PVT underscore bar underscore chart. Let's delete out the charts and let's take a look at the data that we're displaying. So in this one, I want to show the revenue by sales channel. So once again, I'm going to remove years from rows and total profit. And we want revenue by sales channel. So let's drag the sales channel down into rows. And we want the total revenue, which is just here. So again, a really nice, straightforward little table. Is this the one that I want for the bar charts? Sorry, I want to display this as sales channel and item type. So we're going to combine item type with the sales channel. We're going to drop that into rows as well. So I can see all of the offline sales for all of the different items or different categories and all of the online sales as well. Now, again, this is quite a lot of information to display in a bar chart. if I was to go to Pivot Table Analyze and click on Pivot Chart and choose Bar, you can sort of see what that's going to look like. It's not even showing me all of the items, the different categories. I'd have to make this a really tall table in order to see all of those. So if you do have a lot of data and you're trying to cram it into a certain chart type, one little thing I would say to do is maybe start applying a filter to just show the top 3 or the top 5. That can be a lot better than trying to show absolutely everything. So that's what we're going to do with this data to display just the top 3 as opposed to all of the different categories, the different items. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and change the number formatting. So this is the total revenue. I'm going to go for accounting, take the decimal places down to 0 and click on OK. And I'm just going to display the top 3 items. So if you want to apply a filter, we can right click, go to filter, and we have a top 10 filter in here. So the name of this filter is a little bit deceiving because you don't have to display 10, you can display as many as you like. So my management team are only interested in the top 3 categories of products, the total revenue for those particular categories. So let's go for 3. Click on OK, and now you can see I have a much smaller data set which I can comfortably manage in a bar chart. So don't forget about things like that. You can refine your data before putting it into a table, into a chart. So let's go up to Pivot Chart and we're going to choose Bar Chart again. Click on OK. And that looks a lot better. We need to do some tidying up here. Let's right click and hide all field buttons to get rid of those gray buttons. The total isn't doing a great deal for me again, so let's just get rid of the legend. Let's delete that out. And what I'm going to do here is instead of having the values in the horizontal axes underneath, I'm going to add these as data labels on the actual bars. I think that looks a lot more effective sometimes, and it also takes up less room. So I'm going to click on my bars, and I'm going to make these bars a little bit wider. Let's right click, Format Data Series. And notice here I can change the gap width between these bars. So if I drag this down, it's going to make those bars essentially a lot thicker than they currently are. So you can make these as wide or as narrow as you want. So I quite like that look. I think they look better, a little bit thicker. What else do I want to do here? Let's go to formatting. Actually, let's format the data series. Oh, well, that's the same place I was in. If I go to fill, I can change the colors of these bars as well. But if I choose vary colors by point, it's going to recolor them all for me based on the theme that I have in use in Excel. And each bar is going to be a different color. So that looks quite nice. I think I'm going to leave it like that. Now, to add the data labels, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete this horizontal axis, like so. Looks a lot cleaner as soon as we do that. I'm going to click on my bars, and you can either use the plus just here, or you can right click and you can add data labels from the right click menu. And if we add data labels, we can then choose to display them on the inside end. And for me, that sometimes looks a lot nicer than having them on the horizontal axes or on the outside. If I select the first one, I can apply formatting. So let's go to the Home tab. I'm going to change these to, let's make them white, and I'm going to make them bold. And I think those look quite nice. If you wanted to do something like make these bars really stand out, you could choose to add a border around the outside. Again, just make sure that you select them. And when you select one, it will select all. And then we can go up to the Format tab and we can apply a shape outline. So maybe I just want to do a grey outline just to make those stand out from the background. Another thing I'm going to do is delete the grid lines. So just click on one, it will select them all, press delete. The last thing to do here is simply to add a chart title. As I said, we are going to replace these, but just so I can remember what they are, this is the, I'm just going to say revenue by item and sales channel, like so. And there is our third chart. The final chart we're going to do is just a very quick little donut chart. It's the pie chart's favorite cousin. So I'm going to copy the worksheet once again, hold down Control, drag and drop. Same old process. Let's right click, let's rename. This is going to be pivot underscore donut. Always makes me hungry when I'm doing a donut chart. Let's delete out the chart. Let's click in our pivot table and we're going to remove the rows, both of those, and the values. And in our donut chart, we're going to just show the count of orders, and we're going to do this by, should we do this by region? Yeah, let's do it by region. So let's drag region into rows. And I'm going to add, we're doing a count of the actual orders. So for this, I can use the order ID because every time there's an order, it gets assigned a unique order ID. So I can drag this down to values. Once again, by default, Excel is going to try and sum together all of the order numbers. We want it to do a count as opposed to a sum. We want it to count the orders. So we can jump into value field settings and choose count, like so. Now, once again, I only have a few different regions just here. So let's see how that looks in a donut chart, because pie charts and donut charts in general are not my favorite types of chart. They're quite limited with how much data you can actually display in them. And I find that pie charts and donut charts are generally good for when you have maybe 2 or 3 things that you want to kind of represent in that chart. Any more than that, and it starts to get a little bit confusing. And there are other chart types that are much better at displaying that data. So let's have a quick look. We might have to apply a filter or do something. I'm not sure. Let's see. Pivot charts. Now you'll find your donut chart underneath the pie category. And it's this one at the end here. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad actually. Let's leave that as it is. Let's go OK. There is our donut chart. Let's do some tidying. We're going to right click, hide all fill buttons on the chart. The legend is a bit untidy, but it can't be helped. So I'm going to leave that there. What I am going to do is I'm going to apply a little bit of formatting to this donut. This hole in the middle of the donut is way too big. So let's select it, right click, format data series, and we can change the donut hole size. So I'm going to drag this down, and you can make this as big or as small as you want. And what I see a lot of people do if they have something like this is they might add something like an icon in the middle there just to give it a little bit more visual interest. One thing I am going to do with this is I am going to add data labels so that we can see the actual number of orders per segment. So once again, we can click on the plus, we can go to data labels, and yep, there we go. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I'm just going to drag it out. And as I said, you might want to fiddle around with this a little bit more. I'm going to make those, should I make them white? Yep, why not? And bold, just to display. All right, let's give it an old name. So this one is, I'm going to call this number of orders by region. And there we go. There is our 4th chart. Now, I've forgotten to name a lot of these. As I said, it's always going to work out better if you make sure that you name things as you go through. I haven't. We are limited for time. So just pretend that I did that for all of them. Because what we need to do now is we can start moving these across to our dashboard and arranging them as we want. Now, let's go to the dashboard, because what I want is, before I have these charts, I want to have some what we call cards at the top, just showing some key metrics. Now, where are my key metrics going to come from? Well, they're going to come from my calculations worksheet. So if we go over here, I've already done this because I knew we wouldn't have enough time in an hour to go through exactly how I've calculated all of this. But just understand, in column A, I have the key metrics that I want to display at the top of my dashboard. So these are really the things that in one glance you can just see exactly what you're looking for. So maybe my manager wants to know straight away what the most profitable item is, what the most profitable region is. Maybe he wants to see the count of cancelled orders, how many people have cancelled. And maybe he wants to see the top sales channel. Is it online or offline? So this information isn't going to be represented in any form of chart. It's just going to be there at the top. But we want to construct it so that if our data changes, the original source data, and maybe the top sales channel changes, we want to make sure that it also changes on the dashboard. So we need to start performing some calculations on a different worksheet and then linking them through to our dashboard. So I've already done them, but just so you understand what you're looking at and the type of thing that you can do. And this is where dashboards can start to get really complex when you start to have lots and lots of different calculations. So let's start with the most profitable item or category. You can see here this little table and the one underneath. So basically, in order to find out what the most profitable item is, and I can see it at the bottom here, it's cosmetics, what I've had to do is a couple of different calculations. Now, if you take a look in the formula bar, you can see I've used the unique formula, which will give me a unique list of values from whatever column I've selected. So it's basically looking at my sales data spreadsheet at the item type column, and it's pulling back all of the unique entries. So if you go to sales data and look at item type, you'll see we have baby food and, all these different ones are repeated throughout this column. We just want a unique list of each one. So that is where the unique function is really good. So I just have a long list of those, and I want to find out the total profit for each of these item types. So once again, if you take a look in the formula bar, I've done a sum if calculation. And sum if is one of my favorite formulas. It basically allows you to sum together values based off of a condition. So this sum if has basically said, look at the sales data worksheet and add together the profit whenever the item type is baby food, snacks, beverages, so on and so forth. So it's summing with a condition. So now that I have all of that, I can work out what the maximum value is because I'm looking for the most profitable item out of all of these. So at the bottom here, I've done a max calculation on this data above. So we're looking for the maximum value in the cell range C5 to C16. And that is that value just there. And I've worked out which item that this value corresponds to using a lookup. So I've used index and match to look in this table for the maximum value and return what item type it relates to, which is cosmetics. So I've done a few different calculations there to get kind of where I need to be. But because of the way I've constructed this and everything links back to that source data, if anything changes, it's going to feed through to my calculations worksheet, which is in turn going to feed through to my dashboard. So everything is always going to be kept up to date. Now, I don't want to linger too much on this, but I've done a similar thing to find the most profitable region. I've created a unique list of the regions. I've done a sum if calculation to find the total profit by region. I've found the maximum value, and I've done a lookup to find out what the region is that relates to that maximum value. So exactly the same to find out the key metric for this second one. The count of cancelled orders, well, that was fairly straightforward. All I had to do was a count if. I just want to count the orders column where it says cancelled. So that is how I've got to that value. We then have the top sales channel. So just here, again, I haven't bothered doing a unique because there's only two of them. I've just typed online and offline. We've done a count if this time because I want to count the orders. I've done a max and then we've done a lookup again. So very similar, it's just using count if as opposed to sum if. So hopefully this gives you an idea as to the types of things you can do lots of weird and wonderful calculations and then have it all feed through to your dashboard. So with all of that in mind, what I can now do is go back to my dashboard and start pulling everything together. And we've got about 10 minutes left, so we should be able to do this. So let's start out with those calculations. How do I want those to look? So again, you can spend a lot more time doing this than I am, but I'm just going to add some basic shapes. This is where the dashboard design comes in, and I am not the most design-orientated person, but let's just do something. Let's add a little square, rectangle. I'm going to make this, let's make it a dark pink color. I'm going to say no outline. And I'm going to add a title to this. So this one is going to be the most profitable item. So let's right click, edit text, and I'm just going to make this caps. We'll just say most profitable item. And we're going to center it. This is just basic formatting skills. We'll center it in the middle, horizontally and vertically. I'm going to make it a different font. Let's make it stand out a bit, and I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, size 14. So I like to apply all my formatting to the first one, and then I'm just going to duplicate it 3 more times. Control D, Control D, Control D. I'm going to roughly drag these into position. So put them along there. These don't have to be perfect. You just sort of have to get them into some kind of order, because then what we can do is select them all, holding down the shift, and we can use our alignment tools to put them exactly in the correct position. So with all of these selected, if we go to Shape Format, into Align, I'm going to align them to the top, and I'm going to say Distribute horizontally, and that's going to make those look perfect. Now, with all of these still selected, I'm going to press Control D again to duplicate all of them. And I'm going to drag these directly underneath the other ones, like so. And I'm going to make these a slightly different color. So let's go for a lighter pink for those. As I said, you can spend more time doing this. But what we want under here is this is where we want to actually display that key metric that we've got on the Calculations tab. So how do we get that to pull through? Well, we need to make sure that we're clicked within the shape, but then we immediately want to go up to the formula bar and type equals. We can then jump across to our Calculations worksheet, and our most profitable item, we just need to link to that cell. So that's right at the bottom where we have cosmetics. Let's click that cell and press enter, and it's going to pull it straight through to the dashboard. Now I'm going to apply my formatting at the end. Let's do the next one. Let's type, sorry, I always do that. You don't type equals in the shape. You have to do it in the formula bar for this to work. So equals, go back to our calculations. We then want the most profitable region. Press enter. Same thing for the rest of these. So let's delete out what we have in there. Click in the formula bar, equals. And we want, what do we want for this one? Is this cancelled orders? I think so. Oh, I need to change those headings, don't I? That would be helpful. Let's delete out the last one. Click, equals. Let's go back to calculations. And the last calculation that we want is the sales channel, and hit enter. So now I need to go in and change these headings. So this is most profitable region. So let's just change, oops. This is the number of cancelled orders. And this one is top sales channel, like so. So now that I have those linked through, I'm going to apply my formatting. So once again, I want to make this a little bit bigger, and I'm going to make it bold, and let's change the font to a darker pink. Now I do this at the end because then I can just use Format Painter to do it for the rest of them. So with this one selected, this first one, if we click on Format Painter twice, that's going to allow us to just select the other ones. Press the escape to come out of Format Painter. So now this is completely dynamic. If anything changes in the source data, these key metrics at the top are also going to change. What we can then do is just bring across our charts that we created. So let's go back to our first line chart. Let's Control C, go back to the dashboard, Control V, and then we can move it into place. I'm just going to put that there. We then want our map chart, Control C. This one, because it's got a lot of data, it can be a little laggy, as you can see, but it does come through eventually. That's perfect. I'm going to position that somewhere around there. And you can drag these around and make them look a little bit nicer if you want. I'm going to just make these all nice and even. So let's drag them there. The next one is a bar chart. Control C, back to the dashboard. Control V, and place that one underneath. And I'm going to drag it across. And then finally we have the donut chart, which I kind of think looks a little bit messy, but this is why I don't like pie and donut charts. I'm not a fan, if you can't tell. And then we can drag that so that everything's all nice and even. Now, one thing that I would also probably do is remove the borders off of these charts as well, because I just want to make everything look as if it's part of this dashboard. And you can't do this all in one go. You have to do them all individually. So select the first chart. We want to go up to Format and just change the shape outline to No Outline. I'm going to do exactly the same thing for all of these so that they really look like they're all sort of melded into one dashboard and they're part of this dashboard. So let's just do the last one and click on No Outline. There we go. I'm sure you can make yours look a lot nicer than mine. Now, the thing with these headings, they're all very inconsistent. And this is why I said it doesn't really matter, because what in general I do if I'm constructing a dashboard is I add my own headings so that I can format them individually. And again, I would just do that using something like shapes. So maybe I'm going to grab the rectangle tool. I'm going to drag this along like that. And let's make it, I'm going to make this a blue color with no outline. And I'm going to add some text into this, and that is going to be the title. So I'm going to say, oops, total profit by year. And then I can change the formatting if I want, make all of the font consistent, make it a bit bigger if I want to, and then I would probably delete out the heading in the chart because it just makes the chart look a lot cleaner. And I would add one of these, so I'd duplicate this, and I would add one for each of my charts. It just, again, just adds to giving it a nice consistent looking feel. Now, I'm not going to do it because we are running out of time. Hopefully you get the idea as to how that would look if we do it for all of these. Now, the final couple of things, we've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to try and get to the end. I just want to show you how to add some slices. So I left a little gap at the top here, this little gray area, where we can add in some interactive slices. And slices just act as filters, which we can click on, and it changes what's displayed on our dashboard. So you can add slices by clicking on any one of these charts. And if you right click, you have in here, they renamed it recently. If I go to, just bear with me because I know they renamed these. They're not going to let me do that. No, it's not going to let me do it. They've renamed the button. It used to be called Report Connections, and now it's called Filter Connections, but it's not letting me do it from the dashboard. So I'm going to go to the actual chart. Is it going to let me do it from here? No. Sorry, hang on. Let's go up. I'm getting confused here. You don't need to do report connections. Sorry. Let's click on this first chart. I need to insert the slicer before I try and connect it. Duh. Pivot chart analyze, insert slicer. Now, these slices are going to be presented. Again, you're going to get all of the column headings in your data, and you can choose whatever you want to filter or slice your data up with. So maybe I want to add a slicer for the sales channel and the order priority. Let's click on OK. And these act as little filters, and we can customize these and make them look as if they're part of our dashboard. Now, we are running out of time, but I will just quickly show you a little bit of this. I'm going to click on the slicer up to the slicer ribbon at the top. Notice we have a contextual ribbon, and I'm going to change the columns from 1 to 2 so that those two slicers are on the same row. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to remove the heading to make this look a bit cleaner. Let's right click and go down to slicer settings, because in here we can deselect display header, click on OK, and that looks just a little bit nicer. What we can also do is we can change that background fill so that it blends into that grey background. Now for this, we need to effectively duplicate the style that this slicer is using. And if you take a look above where we have slicer styles, you can see the one selected is the one that's in use, this kind of greeny color. So what I can do is right click and say duplicate, and then I can modify. So I'm going to call this just my initials, slicer style. And the only thing I want to do with fill. So if I go to, I think it's whole slicer, go to format, and from here we can remove the background fill. And that says no color, doesn't it? Just bear with me 1 second. I'm just confused because it already says it's got no color, but it's quite clearly got a white background fill just there. Which one am I going to need to select? Is it that one? No, one of these, which you format, will remove that white background fill. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because, again, you can fiddle around with this and get these to look as you want, but you can remove that background fill from within your slicer styles. I'm just not sure which one of these controls that one. And then you can make these look as if they're part of that grey background and click on them to filter the different charts below. So these act as I said, a little filter, which just let you see your charts displayed in different ways. And I would do the same with this one. If we go to Slicer, I would display this on one row. So I want to increase those columns. I would drag this across and I would have these sitting at the top here, which just serve as a really nice way for people who maybe aren't used to using Excel. It's sort of fairly obvious that you can click on these buttons to kind of extract the information that you're interested in. So I will leave these just because we're under heavy time constraints at the moment to have a play around with these, but just know that you can format them by modifying the slicer style. You can remove this white background and make it look a lot neater than I have done here. Now, the final thing to note here is with these slicers, they will not be connected to all of your charts. So if I click on something online in this slicer, can you see that it did change that total profit by year chart? You can see what's going on down here. Now, if I wanted to control the other charts, we need to connect our slicers to our other charts. And this is what I was getting confused about earlier. We need to right click on the slicer and report connections. This will tell us which charts our slicer is currently controlling. And this is why it's important to make sure that you name your charts correctly. So you can see here, sheet, I've got pivot bar chart, pivot donut, pivot line. Because I didn't name the actual chart, you can see here it says pivot line, pivot. So it's all a bit of a mess over here. So this is why it's important to name them correctly. But I can tell by the sheet which one. So I basically want the slicers to control all of the charts on my dashboard. So I'm going to basically select all of them for this. And now if I select various different things, it's going to change in all of the charts. So you can see that that map chart is now updating. So you're going to find that you need to do that for all of your slicers. Check the report connections and connect them to whichever charts you want them to control. That might be all of the charts. It might be just one or two that you have on your dashboard. But if you don't do that, it's only going to control the first one on your dashboard. Now I'm going to get rid of these because they look hideous because I haven't been able to remove that background fill. Hopefully you get the idea though. And let's see, what's the time? We're slightly over the very, very last point, which is a very important point, updating your dashboard. So if we go back to our sales data, you can see I've got an extra data tab down here. So if this is, let's say this is the next year's sales, what I can do is select the data, Control A, Control C to copy, and I'm going to paste it onto the bottom of the data in the sales data tab. Now let's make sure that we're all the way across. We are. Control V to paste in, and I'm just going to delete out the heading. And if you've got your data in a table, you should find that it is going to update automatically. Now, did I not put this one in a table? I don't think I did I? Sorry. I'm going to put it back in a table. If you've done that before, when you paste in new data, it's going to automatically add on to the bottom. So tables auto expand to accommodate whatever you add. So now, if we have it in a table, if we want to update our dashboard, we can simply go back to here and then we just need to refresh it. So if we go to Pivot Chart Analyze, we've got a refresh button in the middle, and I think we should see something like number of cancelled orders should change. Let's go to Refresh All. No, because I did it the wrong way round. Oh God, it's a bit of a disaster at the end, guys. The problem that I'm having is that I think I got confused when I was showing you the completed spreadsheet. I already put that one in a table. When I came to the workbook, I didn't actually put it in a table, and I forgot to do that right at the beginning, which is a very big error. What should happen is if you have your data in a table, when you build your dashboard, if you add data into the bottom, the dashboard can be updated simply by clicking on refresh, and everything will pull through nicely. I haven't done that, so it's not updating. So I can't have that wow moment at the end where everything all updates nicely. So I'm sorry about that, but hopefully you get the idea. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all learn at least one thing that you think is going to help you. Have a great night, a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.